Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name's Kathryn Liguori, and this is my thesis defense. Thanks for coming. Mindful media, interactive experiences inspired by yoga, meditation, and mindfulness. I'd like to first thank my advisors, Martha Rettig and Saul Baseman, as well as Fred, who just walked out of the room, for all their help over the past 3 years, as well as all of my other teachers and classmates and friends. Here's a quick sneak peek of some of my projects and my thesis abstract. I'm investigating how to leverage the power of new media to promote mindfulness rather than contribute to forgetfulness. This thesis explores ancient mindfulness practices, specifically yoga and meditation, alongside the rise of dynamic media. My goal is to use new media to introduce mindfulness in an engaging and accessible manner to a general audience. My 4 case studies, yoga gloves, Om meter, mandala, and malas, are inspired by the yoga practices of movement, breathwork, focus, and meditation. The user experience for each of these prototypes involves the exploration of color and light through a range of sensory inputs to present yoga philosophy and practice heuristically through conscious engagement. I took this picture as I was sitting on the bus heading home a few months ago. Almost every passenger on the bus had their heads hung low and faces illuminated by their smartphones as the world was just whizzing behind them. At that time, after seeing this and taking this picture, I decided to put my phone away for the remainder of the ride and took the time to focus on my breath, sit with my thoughts, and avoid looking at my phone. A few minutes in, I got the urge to pull it out of my pocket and check it for some reason. I resisted the impulse and adjusted my posture, sat more comfortably, and refocused on my breath. And a few minutes later, the urge resurfaced. During 29 minutes on the bus, I had the urge 16 times to reach for my phone. I counted, and I even had the urge to keep track on my phone as I was counting for this. So this is how bad it's become. It's clear that I've become hopelessly attached and addicted to my smartphone. I admit it, and I don't think I'm the only one. Amy Blankson cites some eye-opening statistics in her book, The Future of Happiness. She says young people spend an average of 6 or more hours a day on their phones, and 50% of teens feel addicted to them. 6% of US employees admitted to checking their work email when their spouse was in labor. The average American user turns their phone on 46 times a day, and only sometimes are we doing something useful like setting an alarm. Other times we're just driven by a buzz or a ping or just the illusion of one. So I know for a fact I always check my phone, just clicking on it. So she goes on to explain that our technological distractions leave us feeling desired and needed, which can become intoxicating and addictive. And in the end, it boils down to our human desire for personal growth and connection. Technology, at the cost of quality, attention, and connection, has given us quantity, efficiency, and convenience. David Rose, the author of Enchanted Objects, is strongly opposed to allowing new media to control us in this negative way. He says, I want the computer-human interface to be an empowering and positive experience, rather than an interruption, annoyance, and distraction. I agree, and I have a similar hope for new media, and I'd like for it to be an enlightening experience rather than an addictive habit. I'm interested and concerned with how the mind, body, and soul are affected by these glass-faced extensions of our human consciousness. How can we continue to grow and form meaningful connections in our lives without the constant distraction of new media? I believe the only way to change this addictive pattern is to become aware of the habit through self-study and regular practice of mindfulness. I choose to define mindfulness as the conscious state of being in the here and now, during which humans have the power to be fully present physically, energetically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. According to global spiritual leader Thich Nhat Hanh, also a Zen monk, To practice mindfulness is to be conscious in each moment of our lives. The opposite of mindfulness is forgetfulness. And he emphasizes that bringing mindfulness to what we tend to consider automatic activities in our lives, such as walking and breathing, is the key. So right mindfulness is the continuous awareness of our bodies, emotions, and thoughts. My 29-minute bus meditation was not the first time I noticed how people mindlessly pass time in between point A and B, both in our lives and on their daily commutes. In 2012, I was studying abroad in Singapore, and I had an assignment to do a time-based, site-specific piece of project. So I chose the Mass Rapid Transit System, the subway system in Singapore, as my site to focus on, and I collected this audio-visual data as research. I observed the majority of people waiting in line, sitting or standing, were not consciously engaged with the environment at all. Many people were staring at their phones, if not dozing off. For me, every ride on the subway was thrilling because of the culture shock. Everything was new to me, which is why I was so entertained by taking this research. But it was my observation that my fellow Singaporean commuters were not as thrilled about the experience as they waited to get to their destination. So I decided to do a little flash mob for my project, and I organized a public performance of the song Sweet Caroline by Neil Diamond, which is very popular in Boston, and the reason why I chose it is because it's a big sing-along in this area. So typically, if I were to present this on a Boston subway, I would have expected some people to tap along and sing along, hopefully, but I wanted to add some shock to this commute. So given the strict legal system in Singapore, it was not often that you witnessed anyone acting out in general, even performing in public. So it contributed to the element of shock, and I was cautioned by multiple Singaporeans that I may be arrested or ticketed for doing this. So with fingers crossed, we did it anyways, and my friend with his guitar started strumming, and we pulled it off. No one got arrested. And turns out that we had some really entertained fellow commuters on the train. It was clear that there was a raised sense of awareness throughout the train based on the bright eyes and smiles. So before my semester in Singapore, I studied architecture and design at Northeastern. And my interest in design partially stems from the exposure I've had to urban settings, specifically New York, while growing up. My family visited New York often, and I was curious how I could design spaces that made people feel alive in the same way that New York made me feel. After a year of school in architecture, I realized I could design experiences like this with a wide range of media, not just confined to architecture. I was looking to design experiences that were at the sweet spot of the social, physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual realms. It's design interventions like this that were inspiring to me. They are designed to disrupt existing social patterns within public spaces. And these interventions exist within the urban fabric of cities across the world in the form of landscape design, architectural features, and public art projects. A change in mental and physical behavior will occur with any successful urban intervention. And the Before I Die wall, such as this, invites users to practice mindfulness momentarily before participating or passing by. It inspires participation through self-reflection and creative expression. The inspirational public intervention brought user participation to an incredibly personal and philosophical level of engagement by asking participants to consider what they want to do before they die. I was honored. I was able to install a version of the Before I Die wall here at MassArt last spring, and it was really exciting to see the documentation of all of the people on their daily commutes stopping to take a look, sign the wall, take a picture, and even those that didn't physically contribute to the wall could read the responses and reflect internally on what their answer to the question might be. So after moving out of architecture, I transitioned into the graphic design department at Northeastern and became very interested in information design and data visualization. As an assignment for an information design class, I designed a visualization of my media use over the course of 2 weeks. And for my documentation, I kept a detailed log of the amount of time I spent each day interacting with a wide range of media. I observed my use of the internet, television, the news, music, movies, phone calls, text messages, emails, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I separated this list into 2 subgroups of entertainment and communication. Based on the infographic, it's easy to see that I spent significantly more time consuming media as entertainment rather than using it as an aid for communication. It opened my eyes to a grander perspective of my relationship with media and how much time I spend using it or abusing it. If we lack awareness of how profound this effect is on us, we risk becoming consumed ourselves by these technological extensions of our consciousness. My personal experience with screen-based media has led me to seek ways to balance its pervasive nature. For me, yoga and meditation have proven to be the perfect practices to filter the constant influx of information from our digital world and still remain in alignment with my own inner world. I cultivated a regular yoga practice around the same time as my graduation from Northeastern. About 5 years of constant studying and staring at computer screens, I needed to decompress. So I signed up for 30 days of yoga for $30 at a local studio in Brookline. After my first hour-long class of heated yoga, I was left laying on my back in the final pose, Shavasana, and I felt more alive than ever. I knew at that moment that yoga would be a part of my life forever. Shortly after my graduation and introduction to yoga, I applied for a job as an administrative assistant here at MassArt. On my way to the interview here, I stopped for a moment to calm my nerves at the Japanese garden at the MFA next door. I stopped going over my mental script of my strengths and weaknesses and why I wanted to work at MassArt. I sat down in front of the finely groomed sand landscape and let my mind settle. I set the alarm on my phone for 10 minutes and mentally practiced yoga by stilling the fluctuations of my nervous mind through meditation. And when the alarm went off, I headed off to the interview with a new sense of quiet confidence, and an hour later I walked out of the tower building as MassArt's newest employee. Early on, during my job at MassArt, I met Saul Baseman from the technology department, and after briefly discussing my background and future aspirations as a designer, Saul told me about DMI. I was almost immediately sold on applying to the program, and I eagerly sent my application in to start the next year. In March of 2014, my acceptance letter came, and I'll always remember my interview with Professors Jan, Brian, and Joe. First, they asked me why DMI, and I told them a little bit about my background in art and design, as well as my interest in designing interactive experiences. I told them a little bit about my degree project from Northeastern. I designed a public art proposal and service design that would help connect transportation hubs to historical sites in Boston. The next question they asked me was, what inspires your design work? And I panicked at first because I didn't know what to say. And then suddenly I blurted yoga because I had just started a serious yoga practice, and it had been something that I was really passionate about. So I carried on about how I had recently started, and I wanted to share this enlightening experience with people. My desire is to design experiences that contribute to a better connection within ourselves and with each other. For me, yoga was one way of getting there, and I believe another way is through design. In seminar 1 with Joe, we read the medium is the massage. by Marshall McLuhan. This book set the tone for the following 3 years of my DMI experience. My biggest takeaway was McLuhan's belief that all media work us over completely in a pervasive massage that leaves us transformed in personal, political, economic, aesthetic, psychological, moral, ethical, and social ways. Now we've experienced the introduction, mass distribution, and continued use of new media such as the personal computer, internet, Facebook, flip phones, smartphones, mobile apps, GPS, Fitbits, I could go on. We can attribute much progress to new media, but I've also become hyper aware of the ways in which it's transformed my relationships with myself, my community, and the global village at large. In January, before my second semester in DMI, I attended a 5-day yoga retreat in Western Mass. The brief overview of the retreat, which was called Quarter Life Calling, is this. It says, your 20s can be a time of possibility, inspiration, and the discovery of your deepest values and truths. This intensive is designed for young adults interested in cultivating an authentic life of meaning and purpose. Surrounded by a community of peers, we share your quest for meaning, and guided by an expert facilitator, you embark on a journey to create the life your soul is calling for. So my classmate and friend Reem also was inspired to sign up, and on a Friday night in January, we set off to create the lives our souls were calling for. This is a sketch from the retreat. We were under the impression that this was a yoga retreat. However, it turns out that the time we spent there, we only practiced yoga for a couple hours total. The majority of our time was spent learning the practice of self-discovery through self-study and active engagement with our peers. We spent 5 days laughing, learning, listening, speaking, dancing, playing, reflecting, and connecting. It was at this time that I learned the deeper meaning of yoga, which is being fully present in your body, mind, and spirit in order to align and serve the higher purpose of your soul. So here we see people that are not aligned, and their heads and their bodies are not connected. And then over here, we see people that are happy with their heads and their hearts connected. During this retreat, I noticed a really calm sense of peace that came as a result of disconnecting from my iPhone and the internet and other digital stimulus. I focused on deeply connecting with myself internally, and I learned how to become more aware of the way that these external forces influence my experience. The overload of social data we digest every day is alarming. White Feed by G. Lee is a social media page that posts white squares on Facebook to create a moment of space and silence within your daily Facebook newsfeed. White Feed is a project that exists directly in this digital stream of stimulus, offering a pause amidst all of the social media. The concept of digital detox for purpose of reconnecting with ourselves and our true purpose has inspired me to use interactive design to create disruption to these hyperactive, overstimulated worlds we live in. When we unplug, we withdraw our senses from digital stimulus and allow ourselves to just be. My goal is to harness the power of new media to be a useful tool rather than an annoying distraction. Through this thesis work, I designed experiences that encourage mindful engagement internally and externally. The following case studies and prototypes are visualizations and interactive translations of ancient yoga philosophy and practice used to attain alignment of mind, body, and soul. Yoga is an ancient system that, aside from breath and body techniques, includes components of introspection, behavior adjustment, and ethics. It has its roots within the ancient civilizations of what is now India, and the very founding philosophies are exemplified in the Vedas, which are 4 ancient texts that were devised over thousands of years and considered to have been directly heard, not learned, or taught. Part of the Vedas is the Upanishads, which is described as the philosophy behind the most absolute spiritual truths. The Upanishads is considered the end of the Vedas, and it's also one of the 6 schools of thought and critical thinking that contributes to the form of the Hindu religion. According to these readings, the Sanskrit term yoga is interpreted as the union of the individual self with the supreme self. The Upanishads also described meditation as the pathway to enlightenment, helping us to overcome the limits of human suffering and distraction to move toward better concentration, stillness, and self-realization. The Yoga Sutras written by Patanjali are considered the classic texts of yoga. Patanjali is considered the founding father of yoga as it's known today, and he's responsible for the first written account of yoga. He's credited for writing it down, but also systemizing the parts of yoga that were necessary for achieving the highest state of comprehension, and it became the basis of the modern yogic tradition. So the organization of this information was broken into 8 subdivisions, or limbs as they're called. If you follow these 8 steps with rigor, you will reach the ultimate goal of true union between mind, body, and soul. And these 8 limbs are the yamas, niyamas, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. The first limb, the yamas, this has to do with your relationship to other people, the external world, and your social discipline. Avoiding harm to others, distortion, manipulation, judgment, stealing, hoarding, over-sexualization, over-communication, over-exercising, and overeating. The second limb is the niyamas, and this has to do with your individual internal discipline. They're the to-do list to live a yogic life. They include cleanliness of your body, mind, and environment, living in the present moment, disciplined practice, self-study, and surrendering to the faith that you're in union with the universe or your personal God. The third limb is asana, is controlling your body through yoga postures and movement. This is what most people think of now as yoga. The fourth limb, pranayama, is the controlling of your breath using breathing techniques. The fifth limb, pratyahara, is controlling your senses. By detaching from the outside world, you can become more aware of the inner landscape rather than outside stimulus. The sixth limb, dharana, is the studying of your mind through disciplined concentration on one focal point. The seventh limb, dhyana, is the contemplation and mindless attention that creates a meditative experience. And finally, samadhi is defined as absolute bliss or enlightenment. I went to a yoga workshop, and the teacher said this about the 8 limbs. You can think of them as a basic guide to being a good person. They're just suggestions for how to deal with everyday stresses in life. And now we're in the post-classical era of yoga. During this period, many schools of yoga continue to develop, including Hatha yoga, which is the physical yoga that everyone recognizes now as yoga. This includes conditioning the body for full self-realization. The important thing to remember about all of these yoga systems is that they share the same root and the same goal of transcending the human experience for full self-realization. So my 4 case studies, yoga gloves, Om meter, mandala, and malas, are inspired by the yoga practices of movement, breathwork, focus, and meditation. The user experience for each of these prototypes involves the exploration of color and light through a range of sensory inputs to present yoga philosophy and practice as accessible and engaging. Yoga Gloves exhibits my experience building dynamic prototypes based on yoga asanas and documenting motion over time. My goal with this project was to visualize the physical practice while also highlighting the more subtle energetic qualities and fluctuations of the practice. In the final photographic documentation of the prototype, the physical human body is absent, but the LED light trails communicate the dynamic flow of the practice. So this is highlighting the third limb of yoga, which is asanas. Now, using new media, asanas can be practiced almost anywhere using yoga apps such as this app, Yoga Glow. And the availability of them has made yoga more efficient, but it doesn't necessarily highlight the practice in the best way for people. So I decided to make it a more physical experience. So the concept began through an assignment for Elements of Media, and I built an interactive object using an Arduino for the first time. Once I completed this circuitry, I was inspired to push the prototype further and translate motion data into LED light and color patterns. I learned how to continue experimentation and user testing without being held back by a fragile prototype, and I purchased these pre-made LED gloves online, which allowed me to carry on experimenting with my photography and rather than worrying about my prototype breaking. So I reserved a lighting studio upstairs, and I set up a camera and tripod and yoga mat, and I asked my friend Kim Kuhn, who works here, to practice some yoga for me. As a yoga teacher of over 20 years, Kim didn't need any instruction, which was nice, so she moved through her practice, and I focused on capturing the process best with the long exposure. This is just a video of her practicing. The first few images came out beautifully with vivid color trails cutting through the thick darkness. As we continued, I asked her to make her sequences more complex. And then as we went on, we adjusted the settings on the gloves from a steady light changing colors to a blinking blue light. And this pattern added the element of time to the visualization. At this point, I was less concerned with the user experience and more concerned about learning how to best capture the yoga gloves. I went on to a next variation, and I replaced the camera and tripod with an iPad, allowing the user to see the documentation process. And these are some of the images that I captured here. Through this project, I established a connection between the physical practice of asanas and a more accessible free-form moving meditation. And this is the documentation at the thesis show. My next project, the Om Meter, is an interactive experience that translates the yoga practices of pranayama and mantra meditation through dynamic color and light. Prana, meaning breath, and yama, meaning restraint, translates as restrained breath or breath work. The first preliminary version of the Om Meter was inspired by this simple meditation that Martha sent me, I think a couple years ago. It asked users to sync their breath with the animation. Using processing, I designed a similar interaction, which slowly grows as the user chants Om. For the second version, I wanted to design a more engaging experience through added challenge and increased reward. So I aimed to make this more visually engaging and last longer by changing the composition and the design to be inspired by the energetic chakra system represented by 7 colorful circles arranged in a vertical line. This is an example of some ancient artwork that communicates the chakra system as some simple geometric symbols. This chakra system consists of 7 main chakras, and each chakra is associated with certain body parts, feelings, concepts, and they're represented by specific symbols and colors. This is some user testing. And the third version of the Om Meter I wanted to bring into a more public space, so I constructed a physical rendition. I had 7 paper lanterns hanging above a small audio sensor and a meditation cushion propped on the ground in the elevator lobby of the tower building. Om. those are the inner workings, and this was the final installation. It's the same thing. The next project was Mandala, which is a series of experiments using dynamic media to represent the experience of dharana, or concentration, by drawing mandalas. Each of the following prototypes explore a different medium and user experience, ranging from digital sketches, time-based installations, collaborative drawing, and playing with sand. The final prototype features a spinning sand dish that translates physical interaction into an evolving mandala projection. The goal of this project is to communicate the practice of mindful engagement and one-pointed focus through intuitive interaction. I was originally inspired by Venerable Tenzin's annual visit to the Brandt Gallery, and I wanted to translate this idea of a sand mandala into using dynamic media. A mandala is a geometric figure representative of the universe in Hindu and Buddhist practices. Within the field of psychoanalysis, the presence of a mandala in a dream state represents the dreamer's search for completeness and self-unity. So the psychoanalytic practice with mandalas is based on self-unity, while the religious significance is related to a unity on a much grander scale. So my dynamic mandala renditions have been inspired by both definitions: a data visualization representing a large community, and also a personal self-healing exercise. And these explorations are also inspired by the limb dharana, or focus. So this was one of my first prototypes. Using processing, I designed a mandala drawing tool. This experience was delightful, but it wasn't very engaging. It was more engaging for the user as they manipulated the mandala, but the viewing experience wasn't very enlightening. I went on for a second prototype and installed a projection of a similar mandala in my office. I was curious to see if the viewing experience was different than the manipulation experience, and it proved to be pretty passive, so this wasn't a very informative experiment either. So for the next mandala, I installed it in the elevator lobby of the tower building, and it was in the form of a participatory data visualization. I invited some classmates to add to the mandala and discuss the experience with them. Then, over 2 weeks, I allowed the visualization to slowly evolve, and it seemed to be successful, but I did hear some feedback from Martha, who said she was in the lobby after a fire drill with students, and they were searching in their bags for pens and markers because they didn't see the materials that I had left out on the ground for them. So that was a clear indication of just the design of the experience in general, and how to allow people to know how to interact with this. So the next version, I aimed for even more interactive experience, and I placed these drawing templates in the cafeteria next to the coffee shop. I designed these 2 coloring templates and I printed them out on big pieces of paper and placed them on the coffee tables with tape and Sharpies. I picked 3 different color permanent markers, and the prompt on each mandala read, pick a color based on what you want more of in your life. So each of the Sharpies had nouns on them such as creativity, laughter, balance, relaxation, happiness, and energy. The end result was 2 colorful mandalas representing dozens of personal meditations.
You're running out. I feel
I wanted to reintroduce dynamic media to this project, so I looked to Marcel Duchamp's roto-relief optical discs from 1935 as inspiration. Simple rotating gear attached to the back of these static designs creates the illusion of a third dimension. The viewing experience is really hypnotizing, and it captures the audience's gaze for an extended amount of time. And when introduced to this work, I was reminded of creating spin art when I was a child. And I thought it was a very interesting, dynamic art-making process and a static data visualization of the process. I did some experimenting at home with my record player. I made some homemade sand. And then Adam from the animation department was nice enough to lend me this old ceramics wheel so I could make a larger version of it. So I conducted 3 rounds of user testing for this version, and each testing was in a different location, allowing me to experiment with the mandala as both a private and public experience. The first round occurred in my studio space, and I asked my classmates and Martha to interact with the mandala. We had a lot of fun, spent a lot of time staring at spinning discs together. During one user testing session, my friend Cam told me his experience with the sand was futile given the impermanence of the designs created by his grooming of the sand. So he preferred the whiteboard and markers over the sand. I concluded that there was value in both the sand interaction and the marker interaction. So my next version was to include both of those.
Feel momentarily confident combined with terror at what's going on. And then acceptance. Oh, this is harder. This is much harder. It doesn't trying to draw circles, but it's like coming out as squares, square corners.
I think it's when you keep the marker still, it's kind of hypnotic. And more less on the drawing. It turns out. And when you move, you're like concentrating on your movement more. So you kind of try and predict how it's gonna go, and it doesn't work.
I really liked that one. So the second and third round of testing, I set up in the atrium with the intention of attracting interest from a more public audience, and it didn't go so smoothly. You can just see all the people walking by, not interacting with it. So every time was a learning experience. So for the next prototype, using an Xbox Connect and processing, Martha and Pascal Ruddig helped me design a system that translates motion data from users' hands in the rotating sand dish to a colorful rotating circular image on the adjacent wall. The user input remains intuitive and engages the user physically, while the projected spinning image engages the user visually and mentally. So this is a a quick time lapse of the installation for the Thesis show. And this was the final product. My goal for this project was to create a system that introduces the opportunity for mindfulness through one-pointed focus and mandala design. I learned the power of paper prototyping with this project, and through exploring a multitude of large-scale mediums, I was able to collect and document a wide range of feedback. Each experience provided me with a new outlook on my project goals and how to best achieve them. Overall, this project became my biggest meditation through repeated focused determination to get the mandala in front of as many people as possible. And I learned the importance of building prototypes quickly and putting them in front of people as quickly as possible. My final project is malas. It's inspired by mala beads, which have been used for centuries to help Hindus and Buddhists stay focused during meditation. The traditional mala is strung with 108 beads, and during meditation, the garland is held in one hand, and the other hand will move along the strand holding one bead for each repetition of a mantra. A yogi will master the first 6 steps of yoga to set the stage for dhyana or meditation. Dhyana distinctly differs from the one-pointed concentration of dharana in that it's ultimately a state of being keenly aware without focus. So this is the act of meditation. New media presents us with opportunities to practice meditation using mobile apps and websites. They also have these new luxurious meditation and relaxation studios, such as this Inscape studio in New York City. The physicality of this studio compared to the virtual Inscape app is an important feature that I considered while designing my prototypes. The meditation experience becomes even more transformational when enhanced with powerful surround sound, comfortable cushions, and dynamic lighting. So malas is a large-scale interactive meditation experience inspired by the yoga practice of using mala beads. Translucent spherical glass bulbs or beads are arranged in a line atop of a polished wooden base. The malas slowly become illuminated as the hand gets closer to the bulb. And as the participant holds his or her hand on the bulb, it'll gradually change color, shifting through 9 colors from blue to red before returning to the original setting. After 10 seconds of inactivity, the bulbs will slowly begin to dim and return to a low blue light. The intention was to complete a full meditation with this dynamic mala set. The user must hold contact with the bulb for 9 moments while waiting for the colors to shift through the full spectrum, and then repeat the interaction with the following 2 beads. The arrangement of the malas intentionally encourages participants to walk along the beads. So working with Fred Wolflink, I wired and programmed a circuit that gave malas life. Using an Arduino, NeoPixel lights, and a metal plate, we channeled the power of capacitance to activate each mala bead. And I really wanted to use capacitance because it has this magical aspect to it. It's the process of completing or closing an electrical circuit through human touch, which grounds electricity. So we experimented, and as your hand got closer to the plate, the LED light started to glow brighter. To prompt users how to interact with malas, I printed out simple instructions that read "sync your breath with the light" and taped it to the pedestal in front of the prototype. I also cut out 3 strips of conductive foil tape in the shape of fingers to communicate where the user should place their hand to complete the circuit. Due to unexpected issues, well, they were expected, but due to issues with the coding and finding the specific thresholds necessary to allow the hovering hands to activate the light, I settled for the activation of the bulbs to be based on contact with these 3 metal fingertips. This is some documentation from my user testing at the Thesis show. So my intention with all of my prototypes is to communicate yoga practices in an engaging and accessible manner. By enlarging the experience of mala meditation, an opportunity for a mindful moment presents itself. I originally designed malas as a large-scale installation that I wanted to have 108 crystal balls or beads, since a complete mala meditation cycles through 108 beads. So in this preliminary prototype, I built 3 of those beads with the intention to later fabricate a full mala circuitry of 105 more glass bulbs. And during a conversation at the Thesis show with Chris Wright, who works in admissions, I explained my plan to him, and his response was that he could totally see a massive installation of this in some place like South Station, and seeing a very collaborative meditation experience, which was exciting for me to hear. Through this thesis, I explored the relationship between new media and mindfulness. As I conclude my journey in DMI, I reflect on the interconnectedness of my experiences, bringing them full circle, as well as anticipating how I can continue to live and share my truth with the world. Samadhi is the 8th and final limb of yoga. In essence, this is the end goal of the entire path. It means harmony, to bring together, to merge. Thus, samadhi refers to a true union or true yoga. Typically, working on my projects in the past, I tend to thoughtfully plan everything out. So in Design as Experience with Gunta, this was a huge lesson for me to really follow my intuition and just work and make. So this is an example of the first stimulus we got in her class, where I set up my camera and just figured out what I was doing while it was recording. Another lesson I learned was through the 5th stimulus that we got in Design as Experience with Gunta, which taught me the valuable lesson of practice and discipline. We were given a short rope and asked to document the rope in a different way each day for 21 days. I intuitively made the connection between the rope and a yoga strap, which is a prop commonly used in the asana practice. And at the end of this 21-day period, it was exciting to see the transformation that occurred by comparing the photographs of my asanas. And I learned through this that both spiritual investigation and the design process are endeavors that require rigor and ritual. Over the past 3 years, I grew significantly as an individual and as a designer. My time in DMI was a rewarding inward journey that encouraged me to reflect on who I am, who I'd like to be, and how to create an inseparable union between those two people. During this period of self-inquiry and exploration, a drastic transformation occurred. Before coming to MassArt, I felt a lack of community and connection to my job and my education. As I wrap up my time here, both as an employee and a student, I'm overwhelmed by the beautiful community that surrounds me. I was able to grow, evolve, and connect within a brilliant community. My position in the facilities department gave me the opportunity to connect with hundreds of people within MassArt daily. Each of my projects are a showcase of collaboration with these generous friends, family, and faculty at MassArt. In the end, it's all about connection. We connect outwardly through communication and media, but what about connecting within ourselves? How do we understand what is going on in our bodies and minds? How can we use new media to journey inward? The ancient philosophy and practice of yoga has taught me ways to navigate the inner landscape of my mind. My research and design showcases the journey I took exploring the ways in which new media and yoga have come together to promote mindfulness and connection. Personally, I have made internal and external connections throughout this process that have transformed me into a better designer and a better person. I leave DMI having found expanded knowledge, experience, community, and myself. I'll continue my journey in hopes of sharing the practice of yoga and true connection. Thank you very much. Namaste. Hi.
I'm Heather. So thank you very much. This was a very nice presentation, and I enjoyed seeing the connections that you're making. Particularly, you chose a lot of canons from yoga, like the malas, the mandalas. A lot of common. I don't want to say common, but things that are in the mainstream that a lot of people recognize, like a mandala coloring book, and sort of reinterpreting in these ways of trying to create more mindfulness and education around them. Most of I don't have a lot of criticism, mostly just questions around some of the work. With the yoga gloves, what was sort of sought to be learned from the gloves? Because if I were a novice yogi, I would have trouble understanding the movements. So do you see it as something that's intended to be a learning tool or learned from practice? Or do you see just the beauty of the artifact as a result of the practice?
I see the beauty of the artifact because I wanted to represent yoga as this accessible activity or practice for people that aren't necessarily yogis. So by making it first, I was documenting the asanas, but then I made it a more free-form moving meditation. So I wanted people to recognize that you could create this beautiful data visualization of the movement, whether you knew the asanas or not.
That would be really interesting if that were applied in a classroom setting or in a studio setting, where you could get novice users to experiment using these gloves and then track what they're doing so they can see afterwards. Because I find what happens is a lot of studios appeal to someone who's been doing this for a long time. It's really hard for new people to step in. How do you make that place accessible for them when they've got people next to them doing headstands and all kinds of fancy stuff?
I do know that some studios now, they have blacklight yoga, or they incorporate different types of music that might attract people, like hip hop yoga. But it is helpful to have the lights low and to have the added stimulus of cool lights and colors.
So my other question was, what with the chakra piece, the one with the Om, where people were chanting Om, what illuminates the chakras? Was it the pitch of the Om, the volume of the Om, the duration of it, or was it the vibration itself?
It's an audio sensor, and it was the duration of the volume.
The duration of the volume.
Yes.
Okay, that's really important because that's where I think it's a great prototype and a great piece to experiment with. But each chakra has a certain meaning and symbol attached to it, and that's where it would be really interesting if you were to walk someone through either a series of affirmations or series of mantras that would then touch upon each specific chakra light. So, but otherwise I thought it was just so interesting to see that connection between breath and voice to these actual sort of energy systems. And then the other question I had is I thought the relationship of the mandala, like the actual getting someone to physically engage with the sand and then having that motion captured was so interesting to me. I just thought it was a really nice connection. My only question was, what is the relationship of motion to a mandala? That's where I sort of got a little confused because I've seen Tenzin work before, and I know he meditates before he starts his day working. But that was the only point of sort of confusion for me was we went from sort of creating mandala to suddenly mandala spinning. So just something to think about.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think that was more my trying to incorporate the idea of one-pointed focus to stay in line with my progression through the 8 limbs. So I saw the spinning around one point as as a visualization of one pointed focus.
Okay. And then the last thing, the malas, which I thought was so neat. I had a note in here that said scale up question mark, and as soon as I said it, you said, oh, I envisioned 108 of these.
Mhm.
So you kind of answered my own question. But what would be amazing if we think big, like it's great to get everybody in a room and have them engage with 108 malas. Wouldn't it be amazing if people could get their own malas from around the world and have this be in a stationary place, but people around the world as they're praying, if these could illuminate. So anyone could contribute from anywhere. So if you had this installation, but that people were not crowdsourcing, it's not the right word, but crowd praying into, and have them illuminate. So you could see someone's over here, someone's only at, number 3 while another person's at 98.
Yeah.
Just be amazing to see them all kind of lighting up differently.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
Anyway, we wanted to think really scaling it. How do you make it so that it doesn't have to be a site specific engagement. So.
That's really cool. Thank you.
But anyway, I've really enjoyed your presentation, and your book is beautiful.
Thank you.
So it's really nice to see work happening in this area.
Thank you.
The word that came up for me a lot, and I think it came up as you were just talking to Heather, is energy. From the beginning, you noticed that everybody's energy was focused down and was lifeless. And it seemed like you wanted people to explore movement and yogic poses, and you did it, right? I mean, I think it was amazing to see the expression of energy in the yoga gloves. It's motion, but it's also the trace of light, which is very spiritual, and similarly throughout your other projects. And I understood what you were saying about the spinning, but I'm not as familiar with Tenzin and the work with the sand.
It's not spinning.
If it's a very slow process, or if he, does a Jackson Pollock, which I imagine he doesn't. But he moves maybe a little more energetically, but it seems like it's a very meditative, very purposeful kind of activity.
Yeah.
And I think that what's interesting when you think about energy is how through your work, using the liminal aspect of creating objects and installations to create energy between people and things that might not have been there before you made the project. So it's really amazing, cool work. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
I really also appreciated your presentation. I really loved the idea of using the same technology that's often used to distract us to create these moments of self-reflection. I found it really refreshing. One question I would have is sort of where do you see your work fitting in after this? Like we saw a lot of installations in more controlled environments, but where do you see it when you release this work into the wild? Because I think that's where this work can get really interesting.
Yeah, I think that all of my projects I've envisioned at a larger scale than they are and in more of a public setting than they are. So for me, moving from my office to the elevator lobby was more public, but I would even love to go, outside in like a plaza or a public space and see how people interact with it there. So that's always been in my mind when designing every prototype. But just obviously, working with what I can do at this scale.
I really want to get to at least experiment once with something like this.
Yeah.
Because I think it'll be really interesting.
Thank you very much.
Your projects have a prehabilitation quality to them that kind of plant the seeds of mindfulness, and I commend you for having that as your mission as a designer. When I think of a movie Anne-Marie was involved with, the Dharma Brothers, where they brought meditation into federal prison systems and saw this like massive improvement in the prisoners' well-being. I urge you to bring it to the places that need this. When we think about what happened last night in England and how something like the idea of beauty being in someone's mind is a dominant thought, and that can change the course of someone's life for a very positive think this needs to be where it's needed most.
Mhm.
And that means like in unexpected places,
Mhm.
like the facilities office for one.
First place where everyone's really upset about things.
You know, that's a great start, but in, you know, other places that are more pressing.
Mhm. Thank you. Very good points. Yes.
I just want to congratulate you on the Before I Die project. That had absolutely such a wonderful open interface, and you know, people. It reminded me of the Pianos project in Boston, where
Yeah.
people knew what to do, and of course you could only do it if you could play the piano. But with your project, it was, you know, every day another load of people just interacting very freely and being engaged in
Yes.
a way that was really wonderful to see. I really appreciated that.
Thank you. I do have to say that artist is originally Candy Chang. I don't know if I mentioned it, but that project has been reiterated probably thousands of times across the world. So I don't want to take credit for it, but I did build it. Well, help to build it.
Credit for having installed
Installed it,
is,
yes,
a
yes.
wonderful thing for all of us who are in this community.
Thank you.
That was really a great presentation, I thought, and the project has resonated with me since, you know, we began talking about it. And I just wanted to encourage you more to look for unusual public applications for it. And like, for instance, in the city of Boston, they have an artist in residence program that actually inserts artists to work within departments of city government. And just to give people who aren't exposed or have access to the sensibility of art makers and designers, that exposure and implementation within their work routines. So there are programs like that, I'm sure, outside of Boston too. And I would just really encourage you strongly to look at those and think about how they might also be a catalyst for you then going into more like public art installation kind of stuff within places where it would be better understood, accepted, and implemented.
Thank you very
Great
much.
stuff.
Thanks.
Katie, we're running a bit behind, but I wanted to say, aside from a beautiful presentation today and the work you've done, thank you so much for all the contributions you've made to BMI in the last 3 years. It's been amazing. The fresh media alone should qualify you for an MFA degree. But thank you so much for everything that you've done. I'm really going to miss you, but we're thrilled that you found a new direction in your life.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Advisors to join us outside for a moment, and John and Heather.
Tell your sister. Wow. I'll see you soon. Eject these guys. Are you gonna use this? No. Oh, okay. Here, yeah, no. I'm afraid to let go of them. That was awesome. I left my charger here if you want to use it. Is it okay? I think I'm at 100. Should be good. I think it's not the same one. You're good. Okay. Congratulations.
everyone. My name is Amanda Schuermann, and I'm going to be presenting my thesis defense today. I first want to thank all of my mentors, Martha, my project mentor, Dennis, my writing mentor, and Fred, my technical advisor. Couldn't have done it without you, and all of my classmates and people who helped me along the way. Thank you so much. So the title of my thesis is Play and the Courage to Create. The contents of this presentation will include my abstract, some introduction about my background, contextual research, case studies, and my conclusion. A common goal in my role as a designer and an educator is to create engaging experiences. One way to engage people is through play and the creative process. Regardless of age, through play, humans can gain creativity, confidence, and courage. The challenge of engaging in play, specifically for teens and young adults, is that it's not always acceptable and have a fear of being judged by their peers. Self-consciousness and inhibitions have the power to take away a person's willingness to try. In my projects, I want my users to dive in and become immersed in the process of play and making without worrying about the final product. My goal is to design interactive, play-inducing experiences where the user openly embraces the unpredictable and imperfect outcomes of the creative process. Through researching and testing methods of disarming self-consciousness in both design and pedagogy, I developed a system of conditions that enable people to play and gain the courage to create. So, my background is in art and design and education, and I came to MassArt in 2007 and started my BFA as an art teacher education track. At MassArt, I studied and graduated in 2011, and while I was at MassArt, I became really interested in the portfolio areas of multimedia and projection installation design. Oops, sorry. I discovered my passion for new media, and I started using sound, videos, projection, and different sculptural elements in my work. I was drawn to these mediums because it was something that you could really involve people in through, rather than having people just look at it. So I really liked that part of it. Seemed more immersive. So after earning my BFA in art education, I began teaching at Dorchester Academy as a visual art and design teacher from 2011 to 2015, currently at Plymouth North High School, and I just got a new job at, it's supposed to be Monomoy Regional High School on Cape Cod. So in the beginning at Dorchester Academy, these are my kids on their last day of school, I was able to design my own curriculum to fit the needs of the population. Our school had a lot of difficulties engaging students, keeping students coming to school in general, and meeting the academic standards. It was very challenging, especially in the arts. And through teaching, I gained an interest in designing methods to engage teens through play. Something I learned about my students is that they open up more when there's some type of play activity involved. By making hands-on learning experiences, I was able to facilitate creativity, courage, confidence, and just general even participation in the arts classroom. Using play as an entry point to a new concept or unit in the arts class was very effective. So what can be learned in this thesis is how strategies used in arts education or pedagogy can help inform design decisions. Designers need to consider their audience and understand what are the inhibitions that their users might have. This way they can design work that fully engages their audience and gives them the confidence they need to participate. In my designs, I use digital interactive media because it has the power to engage people in a dynamic way. Instead of simply looking at work of art design, people are involved in the physical experience from start to end. So getting into my contextual research, I'm going to start a little bit about my perspective and how I figured out how play is used to kind of engage my students in the classroom. So high school years are some of the most difficult ones. Adolescents are in the midst of discovering who they are as individuals and are trying to determine their place in society. Time and time again, the arts have been an outlet and catalyst for creative self-expression and self-discovery, but a lot of times it's challenging to get everyone to engage in it because some people don't have, they may have a lack of understanding, experience, interest, motivation, and especially in school, sometimes the general attitude towards education can get in the way. So in the time I was at Dorchester Academy, I saw this type of resistance over and over again. One factor in particular that held students back for participating in the arts was their lack of artistic ability or experience. Many students never took an art class before, or they had very little exposure, while other students may have been taking art classes for a long time. So this wide variety of skill level in my classroom was challenging because a lot of students felt that their abilities were being compared with that of others, which made students less likely to participate in class. And that's when a lot of the disruption happens. So there's an obvious stigma at the school at first that a person can only be good at art if they're good at drawing. According to Tom and David Kelly in the book Creative Confidence, they also find that more than any other skill, people see drawing as a litmus test for creativity. This idea can be debilitating, and many students would give up, throw the pencil down, and disengage from the class completely. The fear, hesitation, anxiety, and self-consciousness around taking these risks, or trying something new, or even sharing ideas, is something I wanted to change, and it's something I wanted to address through dynamic media because of its engaging nature. One particular project in my classroom that was very effective, and it also kind of informed my design decisions in the future, was this fashion challenge project done with the art and community partnerships here at MassArt and Dorchester Academy. We came to MassArt, me and my students, and we went to the fashion department and they gave us this challenge after introducing us to fashion in general. And the students had 3 weeks to get into teams and design runway-ready designs just made out of paper. And this idea was very challenging, and a lot of students got kind of worried about how they're going to do that. Some students were dismissive and indifferent about the project, and a lot of them shut it down completely. That's something that I needed to address immediately. So to eliminate the fear in this project and alleviate their anxiety about working with paper and putting on a runway show and walking down the catwalk, guys and girls, I decided to create these mini paper fashion challenges where students got into small teams and they had maybe 2 feet of tape and 1 sheet of newspaper, or however much I gave them that day, to create some type of garment. And in this case, we did hats for the first day. So what was nice is the students ripped and teared and folded the paper. They imagined different ways that they could manipulate it. And they had a lot of fun in this process. They liked the activity so much we did it on several occasions with different limits of materials and even time. And what I noticed about my students was that their anxiety around working with paper was starting to diminish, and they were just enjoying the process. By the end of the experience, each student and their group designed a very lavish final garment for a runway show that we presented in front of the MassArt fashion faculty, and it was really exciting. So what I learned from this was by using limits in the beginning exercises, I was able to ease my students, even the difficult ones who were not engaged, into a complex project and give them the courage to keep creating. It was an entry point that a lot of students needed. So the time and material limits made a playful sense of urgency, which got the kids right into that state of play. Another example. So in order to understand what causes self-consciousness in teens, I began to research adolescence, psychology, human development, and play. So I came across Erik Erikson, who is a leading figure in psychoanalysis and human development and is a lecturer on psychiatry at Harvard University. He states that adolescents aged 12 to 18, mostly my students that I work with, are tackling the fifth stage of identity versus role confusion. In this particular stage, adolescents are in search of their self and personal identity, and it's a time where they will experience confusion, painful self-consciousness, sense of doubt and shame, and fear of their appearance in the eyes of others. This is what I witnessed firsthand in my classroom on a day-to-day basis. In researching play, Dr. Stuart Brown is one of the authors that I studied, and he explains the seriousness of play and how it has an immense impact on a person's happiness, self-awareness, confidence, cognitive development, and creativity, no matter what the age. Unfortunately, today in society, when children become young adults, free play, such as like recess, time for them to kind of express themselves, disappears, and it becomes considered childish or unnecessary. A quote from Stuart Brown: "When we play, we experience diminished self-consciousness of self. We stop worrying about whether we look good or awkward, smart or stupid. We stop thinking about the fact that we are even thinking. In imaginative play, we can be a different self. We are fully in the moment or in the zone." At any age, play can help individuals feel more confident, and according to even Erikson, that's exactly what they need to clarify who they are as individuals. So in my classroom, my students were able to play while they were making things in the fashion project, which gave them confidence to immerse themselves into that creative process. In my research, I also came across the psychologist Csikszentmihalyi, who explores a happy state of mind he calls flow. Flow is the feeling of complete engagement in creative or playful activity, which is what my students were experiencing in the fashion challenge. And it's also what Brown was talking about in this last quote, about being in the zone. So, understanding the state of mind informs my design thinking, where my goal in my projects is to get people into the state of mind so they can experience play and creative processes and be completely in that moment, even if it is just for a moment. This way they don't have to worry about the product, but they're more invested in that experience at that moment. Flow is when self-consciousness disappears and the sense of time becomes distorted. An activity that produces such experiences is so gratifying that people are willing to do it for its own sake, with little concern for what they will get out of it, even if it's difficult. This is what my students experienced. They reached flow when they were fully immersed in the paper challenge, when they're making things with a difficult material, even when it was a challenge. The concept of play and the sake of making for the sake of making, and not being concerned about perfection, reminded me of the author and artist Carrie Smith, who is the author of Wreck This Journal. This is a book where the user artfully destroys the book using Carrie Smith's open-ended prompts. So here it says, pour, spill, drip, fling your coffee here, just for an example. So her goal is to get people to create without overthinking. And she gives this prompt to kind of just get them started. She wants to encourage imperfection in creative processes so they can experience play and also create creative confidence, similar to what my goal is as a designer. She wants people to step outside their comfort zone and take positive risks. Because play is something that young adults and adults don't often get to do, it's a challenge to develop ways that get people comfortable to trying something new. And that's what I want to tackle. Carrie states, starting to play again can induce fear. Somewhere along the line, it is a common belief in our culture that it's not possible to work and play at the same time. What I want to do in design and education is give people a chance to experience play again, and also through creative processes. Play and making has the power to generate confidence so people can have the courage to keep playing, making, and stepping outside their comfort zone. Just to kind of clarify the difference between the courage to create and creative confidence in my thesis. So the courage to create is when people try something new, unusual, or unfamiliar. They use mistakes as opportunities, understand the process is more valuable than the product. They play with materials, mediums, and techniques, express ideas out loud, do something spontaneous without overthinking, or taking positive risks. So, and then creative confidence is what happens after people have gained the courage to create. And they begin to gain confidence in their own ability and want to kind of test the limits and learn. So the Skillful Teacher is a widely used guide in teaching and strategies in the classroom. And the use of limits is used in keeping momentum in the classroom. And time is a key factor. By using time, a teacher can either create a sense of urgency to yield more intuitive decision-making, or slow down time to allow students to engage in deeper thinking. Similarly, in design, it is important to choose the right type of balance of limits to create the intended experience. In my projects, I wanted people to play in order to create something. The following are some contemporary interactive design works that incorporate play activities or creative processes which use specific limitations on time, space, senses, and interactions. And these are kind of where I gained inspiration for my projects. So the 3 projects that helped kind of clarify my design thinking were cloud, water-like graffiti, and common video apps such as Vine or Snapchat. And what all of these projects have in common is their strategic use of limits. Cloud is the first one. In the interactive installation design world, designers use delicate balance of time, materials, space, stimuli, and interactions to engage viewers properly in their work. In Cloud, by Wayne Gareth, they clustered 5,000 pull string bulbs together that turn on and off in a small condensed space. By making the interactions simple with simple pull strings that turn a light bulb on and off, they made the interaction simple enough where users can't fail. So it invites a lot more people to participate. By limiting the proximity of the different bulbs, it invited people to come together, and that encouraged even more kind of fun and play-like activities. Another project is created by Digital Arty, which is an interactive design company whose goal is to introduce the new form of creativity to business and the general public, as well as help artists explore technology and incorporate new digital language into their practice. This project is called Water-like Graffiti. And what it is a giant wall that was installed in the night near a public space. And each of the little pixels on this wall were water activated. So when the LED detected moisture, it would light up, and once it dried, it would turn back off. So users were encouraged to come out at night and utilize a variety of tools such as sponges, wet hands, water pistols, paintbrushes, spray cans, and spray bottles to create these temporary light drawings. His careful, limited selection of fun, unexpected, yet familiar water tools got his users to play and create and collaborate with other individuals. Because the designer used vertical surface and the water as the only drawing medium, users realized that when they sprayed the water, it would drip and fall, which would change their drawings. So not only were the drawings kind of impermanent, but they couldn't be perfect. And so this artist encouraged imperfection, which is something I was really drawn to. And it also reminded me of Carrie Smith's work. In the realm of smartphone applications, limits are also used to encourage users to think on the spot. For instance, the playful mobile applications like Vine or Snapchat, and even Instagram, and a lot of other apps are starting to pick up this trend, allow users to capture and share videos. And what these apps have in common is that they only allow their users to use a certain amount of time. So I believe Vine only had about a 6-second window of time to capture a video. And what was interesting about that and these apps is that this limit, you would think that it limits people's creativity, but it actually opens it up. Because they have such a limited sense of time, they have to kind of think on the spot and be creative about how they create a story. And I really liked that use of time. So, using all my research in the teaching experience, I generated a tool to help scaffold my design thinking that I call the properties of play in dynamic media. My properties of play include providing opportunities for people to make something, encouraging imperfection, implementing strategic limits of time, space, materials, and interactions, and using a sense of familiarity. By incorporating these properties into my thesis projects, I was able to create interactive art-making experiences that got people to play in the moment and feel a relieved sense of self-conscious. By providing people with an opportunity to make something in dynamic media, they can feel fully invested in the experience because they have the power to affect the outcome. It's also really fun and engaging. I think this might be one of your drawings. Fish. That looks like your monster. In the process of making, many people get hung up on what the final product will look like. Humans are trained and expected to produce high-quality, flawless work on a daily basis. By designing projects that yield imperfect outcomes, people can accept that their work will be different than anticipated, and they're okay with it. This is what decreases self-consciousness. But also, it can also encourage people to improve on their skills as well. Taking what I learned from teaching and applying it to dynamic media in my thesis, experiments, and case studies, I also implemented limits or various constraints to yield more spontaneous, on-the-spot interactions, creativity, and innovation. And this short video kind of explains my thinking.
A popular idea. It's the story of the lone artist going away and making something radically different. But what if that's not always the case? What if creativity isn't always about thinking outside the box? What if it involves thinking differently about the box? Ever watched a child play with a refrigerator box? It becomes a car, an airplane, a robot suit, a table, a tunnel. Think about Minecraft or Legos. They're basically variations on stacking boxes, and yet the simplicity and lack of options actually unleash the power of creativity. This is the idea of creative constraint. It's the notion that innovation happens when you run into barriers that force you to find a new route.
So by implementing limits of time, senses, space, interactions, and creating these types of constraints, I was able to get people comfortable enough to open up and play and create. And in dynamic media, the right balance of limitations can help engage participants in an interactive experience without completely overwhelming or underwhelming them. The last strategy I use is familiarity. Familiarity is what I use to draw people into the experience and get them comfortable knowing kind of what it does. So the physicality of it, of the design. So for instance, later when I show you my drawing project or in Ball Pit, the physicality, the colors, everything kind of reminds people of something so they have an idea of what it does. And that's what also gives people the courage to participate. So for my case studies, my very first project was Ball Pit. And Ball Pit, I started in Elements of Media 1. And it was inspired by ball pits from the typical playgrounds. And it consisted of a suspended projector and webcam, a Mac Mini, custom processing code, and a white floor mat. And so as a person walked on or interacted with the floor projection, the individual's location was detected and tracked by the webcam and the processing code. This interaction allowed the participant to physically move, tap, and push the colorful dots away. The goal of Pit was to give people a chance to play in the midst of their busy work or school days and feel confident enough to let go of inhibitions for that moment of time. And this is my video abstract showing my process. Observations of this, the first prototype, which was in Tower Lobby, when it was installed during final review, so you can imagine the traction we were getting. And what I noticed about the project was that people were stopping in the middle of running towards the elevator with their big thesis projects and interacting with this ball pit. And what I liked about it was that people, once they interacted with it once, they wanted to do it again, and they were trying different things each time. So someone might have used a backpack or a purse to try to interact with it. Some people tried kicking or swimming or crawling on the ground. And those are all actions that you don't usually see people doing. So by having that little nostalgia, that little bit of familiarity of the ball pit, and getting them comfortable to come participate and having it very playful and interactive, got people to pause and play, which was really exciting to see. So in terms of my properties of play, I allowed people to create different voids, make different interactions with the ball pit. I used limits of space and interactions so that the balls just moved and came back. That was it, based on movement. And familiarity at the concept of the ball pit, kind of to draw people in. And encouraging perfection, basically because it was impermanent, that their drawings weren't going to last, or their voids that they created, they kind of accepted that it's not going to be permanent, it's not going to be perfect, and it's just about having fun. My second project was Pick-to-Print. And Pick-to-Print is a digital blind drawing machine where users are given a word or prompt, like a card, and they have to draw the prompt without seeing their progress until the end. The concept behind Pick-to-Print derives from the common exercise I use in the art room called blind contour drawing, which is an introductory art drawing project where students basically are either blindfolded and they can't see what they're drawing on the paper. And it's meant for students to get comfortable with drawing and being imperfect and being okay with that. And that kind of gets everyone drawing at the same level, so people aren't comparing themselves to another person who may have had more drawing classes. And this is my process for designing Pick-to-Print. And I first started off, so I can explain it. The first iteration of this was I brought in a tablet, connected it to a computer with Photoshop, and just told my students to draw something. I gave them a prompt, and they had to do it without seeing any screen. And a lot of them couldn't see it until I actually printed it. And the students liked it so much that we did it the entire class. Don't tell my principal.
Can I look at it? Yes. So cute. Oh.
final interface I came up with, I took away the screen completely. I created a drawing surface with a familiar drawing stylus tool so people can understand kind of how it worked. A giant arcade button to kind of create that kind of game-like feel. And then the little printer at the bottom so they can get their receipt with their drawing after the fact, which was really kind of a pleasant surprise for some people. So when my participants looked at other people's drawings on the wall as they were coming up to this installation, they kind of realized that, okay, this isn't supposed to be perfect. This is supposed to be playful and fun, and that's kind of what helps decrease their self-consciousness, having that visual and knowing that it's not going to be perfect. So many people said in the different exhibitions I showed at Fresh Media and the Thesis show that it felt more like a game. They felt like it wasn't a test of their creative ability. And so these are some of the results that we got. As you can see, they're very expressive. So another goal of my work was to get people to gain the courage to create, and that again means that once the individual experiences play in that state of flow where they're engaging in that creative process, they're more likely to want to engage again and again. And when a person learns how to do something, many times they feel the need to do it again to see if they can improve themselves. This drive is what helps gain the courage to create. And in terms of my users' interactions with the prototype, many people came back more than once. And I felt that because it posed a bit of a challenge for people to draw with their eyes closed, they're motivated to come back and gain more skill. And that gives people more creative confidence. So by encouraging imperfection in the beginning, you kind of get people to buy into it and then feel comfortable over time, and then gain the courage to keep going. Miles. Through witnessing people laughing, drawing, joking, sharing, creating games out of this, and smiling during their experience, I knew that my project was putting my users at ease and into that state of play. At some point, some people actually didn't show what their prompt was to their friend, and they were trying to get people to guess what their drawings were. So a lot of people interpreted this in different ways, which is really exciting to see. So back to the properties of play. So giving my participants a chance to draw something with a familiar tool. So we have the making and the familiarity involved. Limiting their sense of sight and providing them with a single prompt. I was able to encourage imperfection and get them into a state of play where they could accept the imperfect outcome of the process. Light Draw is my final project. And it's inspired by a long exposure photography technique in which the camera captures light trails as they move. And this is a project I do in class, and my students always get really excited about it. And this is just us in the auditorium kind of playing. So this is the end product of that last little video clip. And as you can see, some people bolted across the entire auditorium without falling, hopefully. And you know, they had a lot of fun with this. It's one of the most playful and engaging projects I do in my photo class. But of course, with every single teaching experience, there's always something that goes wrong or something that's not effective. And so I wanted to figure out what those challenges were and kind of interpret this in a dynamic experience to address some of the issues so my students could fully get into a state of play and gain creative confidence moving forward. So in the beginning, at the end of this unit, actually, I had students fill out a survey to evaluate their experience with the light drawing project, and I found those issues. So on the top half of this diagram, so about 50% of my students were having difficulties either coming up with ideas. Some students were nervous in front of the camera. They were maybe camera shy. They didn't like the idea that someone was photographing them. And some students were having trouble figuring out when to start and stop moving and drawing because they couldn't hear the exposure or the shutter speed go off. So to address these issues and to create a dynamic interactive experience that promotes play and creative confidence, I decided that I would need to create a private space for people to make their drawings so they didn't have to be watched by an audience. A method for creating ideas, and also a visual timer for the light drawing. So the private space would help diminish self-consciousness. By having a way to generate ideas, it could give people the courage to create and try something new. And the visual timer could give people confidence knowing how much time they had left, and also generate that sense of urgency, which also allows for more spontaneous movement and drawing. So to make the experience more private and decrease the self-consciousness, I decided to make an enclosed space where participants would feel more comfortable playing with the light tools. If there weren't a booth there, everyone would be kind of in a performance in front of people in the gallery, which would, I think, make people even more nervous. I also knew that I needed to take away the photographer. That's the person that my students were originally getting nervous in front of. So I was introduced to DragonFrame. It's an animation program that connects to a camera and allows you to control the camera remotely from a computer. So this allowed me to take away the photographer and give the user the complete control over the experience and have that privacy. So to help people come up with ideas, which was the other challenge, I left the DragonFrame computer on the outside of the booth so people could see what other people have done. And it also encouraged imperfection because light drawing that's just like that. So knowing that these were very expressive drawings kind of decreased people's anxiety about getting into the booth and doing something different. And to address the timer issue, I created a processing program with a visual countdown. And because I wanted my participants to feel confident in this experience, and I also wanted both the timer inside the booth and the DragonFrame software outside the booth, there are two computers, to be activated at the same time, I created a single switch that you touch, and it does both. So it would start the timer, and it would start the DragonFrame, which would start the exposure for the camera. So this way, when they entered the booth with their light tools, they only had to press one button and draw. In addition to the visuals on the outside of the booth, I played music on the inside of the booth so that people could move to the beat, even if they got kind of nervous about what to do once the timer started. So by doing that, you can't fail. There's something that you can do. There's something to help you react. And these are some of the fun results that we got. Something new that I learned about LightDraw was the amount of collaboration the project encouraged. This is something that didn't occur in many of my other projects, which were more independent. About 50 to 70% of the final light drawing images contain more than one light tool, so you knew that there's multiple people in the booth. At one point, I witnessed a group of girls interacting with the booth in teams, and also Fish and his family were in there as well. And what I was interested about this was that they went in multiple times, and they came out multiple times to see their results. And over time, they kept coming up with new ideas to go into the booth with and try to figure out, okay, where's the best place to stand? What type of tool am I going to use? And they kind of just evolved. And that's what creative confidence is. So just encouraging imperfection in the beginning, and then once that wall is down, that's when confidence can happen. So LightDraw gave my participants a chance to create light drawings. The visuals for other people's work encouraged imperfection, gave them a sense of familiarity of how it worked. And by limiting time, space, and light drawing materials, I got people to think and react on the spot and play. And these strategies enabled my users to enter the play experience and gain the creative confidence they need. So all of my projects engage people in play and different creative processes, which gave them courage to create. To get people to play, especially those who are not used to this concept or action, there first needs to be that point of entry. And these projects provided it. They allow my participants to openly embrace unpredictable, imperfect outcomes of the creative process, and accept imperfection in the beginning stages of learning something new. The ways in which I was able to achieve this was through those different properties of play in dynamic media. Unlike traditional forms of art and design, dynamic media has the capability to involve and immerse the viewers in an experience by activating the mind and body. By providing people with opportunity to make something in dynamic media, they can feel fully invested in the experience because they have the power to affect the outcome and make their own mark. Through encouraging imperfection in dynamic media experiences, designers can get more participants to feel comfortable interacting with something that is new and different because they can't fail. You're opening the experience up to everyone by doing this. By making experiences yield imperfect outcomes, in a way you're challenging the participant to try to beat the system and improve their outcome. This drive people have to be perfect is what can generate creative confidence. By encouraging imperfection in the beginning, you open the door to everyone and give them the opportunity to create, and some will try to conquer the system. By utilizing limits of time, space, senses, and interactions, designers can create experiences that encourage participation and play. The right balance of limitations can help engage participants in an interactive experience without completely overwhelming them. Similarly, in the classroom, the same properties of play and dynamic media can be applied to pedagogy. Every student comes to class with a different abilities, backgrounds, and experiences. To get young people engaged in the lesson or activity, it is important to start with an activity that encourages imperfection and play. Play is something that allows people to explore an idea, concept, or process in their own way that feels natural to them. And by encouraging play, you're not only allowing the individual to discover and imagine the possibilities in front of them, you're helping them learn something in their own way, and you're helping them clarify who they are as individuals. It's not necessary to be perfect all the time, because when people dwell on getting things right, they can lose their ability to think creatively. So encouraging imperfection and giving people a chance to play allows individuals to gain the creative confidence, which is a strong foundation for success in the 21st century. So through utilizing the strategies and research provided, designers and educators alike can develop interactive experiences that disarm self-consciousness through creative play. And these are strategies that I am going to, in the future, incorporate into my own classroom and actually have already been doing. I brought the Pick-to-Print project into my classroom and had my students play with it, and they were very engaged and excited about this process. As far as the light painting project goes, I've already been starting to implement some of the strategies I used in class to help improve that unit as well. Thank you.
Amanda, thank you very much.
Thank you.
There's a lot of exploration in these projects. I can see you're trying out a lot of different things, and what I'm seeing in the work is that you're sort of performing a lot of experimentation to try to develop some pedagogical structures for yourself in the classroom for engagement. That's where I see a lot of this going. And please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep.
Particularly when you set us up as sort of teaching in this Dorchester high school. Yes. And that there was a lack of engagement with the students or a fear of mark making because they felt like that it wasn't good enough. And this idea of equating an expertise in drawing to creativity and trying to find that. So in that way, I really appreciate the breadth of experimentation. What I would encourage you to do is to try to now find those threads or things that kind of really make sense to be able to build upon. Because what I see is the two big themes I found in the work was strategic use of limits. This is something you identified very quickly with the paper. The paper project with the hats, and that was a great way of getting the students to kind of loosen their expectations.
Yeah.
And then also the idea of encouraging imperfection. So I definitely see that thread running through everything. I would say next steps would be to then take these ideas, things like the Picto-Print, where people get a prompt and they do look quickly and it prints it out. How to move that now beyond sort of the novelty of making through a digital means. you know,
Mhm.
because we could easily do that analog, you know, and we wouldn't need to print or we wouldn't need a screen, and you know, but somehow I think having it be digital there might be a tie there to what's loosening. Or did you see that having it be digital loosened the students up in a certain way where it wasn't pen to paper but it was pen to screen?
I
Yeah.
think that so when we usually do the blind contour drawing, everyone cheats. High schoolers cheat. So like when we're doing the drawings and I have them either blindfolded or there's like a paper plate on their pencil and they're drawing from observation, a lot of times they'll peek or they'll look at someone else's and see, oh, theirs is better, and then they might just clam up a little bit. So by eliminating this, like the picture completely till the very end, it kind of made it so no one could cheat, so no one could get discouraged in a way.
So okay, so that's good information to have, definitely. And I think that's something good to note. Yeah, I could get that.
Cheaters.
It's funny to cheat. But the other thing is, how does this then lead to a more serious work or deeper understanding of the work that they're making next? So does something like an experience like that then enable you to move them into a more deeper level of drawing assignment, or does it enable them to start to focus more deeply into something that might require more attention, more time? So that's the only thing is I would say think about what the next steps are for these projects. Perhaps attach specific learning outcomes to some of these things, because then you know, maybe it's an iterative thing where okay, we start with the blind contour, then we move it into I don't know, some other type of thing. So that it then keeps building upon itself. Like it was interesting to see them all hung up on the string, but it was kind of like cool, there they are, but what's next?
Yeah.
So the other the light drawing was interesting. My question, and it definitely encouraged you know, sort of imperfection, it encouraged making. I can see how a lot of these are tying back to the properties of play, and I appreciate that you did define this for us. You know, what are the properties of play? But was there a prompt in the Lightroom, and how do you, again, like what are the next steps after that? Like it's fun to go into a dark room and start to make stuff happen, but what would happen if there were prompts there as well?
That is something I did consider. So the light drawing tool I did consider creating similar prompts, or even when I installed it in the Thesis exhibition, where there were, I did have a stack of cards for the Pick to Pin project where you can only select the top one and look at it. But I felt like because the light drawing is so much harder to control, that having something like that, like for example, a crazy cat lady was one of the prompts. I think that trying to achieve that in 15 seconds with a light tool in a very large space would be so challenging that it would be instant defeat. So for that one, it was more about kind of spontaneous movement and drawing and trying to come up with an idea on the spot, whether it was from reacting to the music. But I think that including a prompt in the future, maybe it depends on what kind of prompt, that could be something to help start off. Maybe it's a shape. I'm not sure.
I think you want to think about that.
Yeah.
I think that's really important because the music then can play a vital role in what someone does in there. So it shouldn't, and I'm not saying that it was arbitrary, but it could easily be interpreted as arbitrary. So for example, if you have music playing, you could give someone a prompt like, you know, illustrate the drums. What would come out of that? You illustrate the trumpet, you know?
Yeah.
So this is where I think when you're creating, and this is where I can see this as an exploration as an educator, you know, building in these frameworks into your pedagogy and into your projects is it's starting to then think about the scaffolding around the work that you're doing. So those are just things to think about.
Thank you.
You may want to look at Richard Lewis Media Group. They do a really great job of using interactive installations as it's a little different, but they do a lot of educational work in museums. But they do a lot of interactive installations that are intended to educate, and I just see there's a little bit of a tie between some of the more experiential work you're doing and maybe some of the stuff that they're doing. And the only other thing I noticed is the ball pit. I was intrigued by the ball pit as an experiential project, but my question was, how is a digital ball pit more fun than a real ball pit, particularly for a child. So I'd be interested to see that tested with children.
Yeah.
And to see like, would a child spend more time in a real ball pit, or would they spend more time with a digital ball pit? And also that I didn't necessarily see that lead to a learning scenario later on. Like it got people to move and interact, but again, like I look at all these projects as sort of a leading up to being able to teach something on a deeper level. So that's just a project I would question in your breadth of work.
Yeah.
That might be one that isn't quite, it's a fun piece and it's interesting and the interactions were great, but I'm not sure it's a clear fit amongst everything else.
That was definitely one of the first ones that got me thinking about play before all the strategies kind of came involved. And so I started, that one was the jumping off point for a lot of these other projects where I started to kind of translate some of my lessons in class into digital media so I can kind of fix some things that were not working in the classroom. So that's definitely something that I did consider, but it was fun. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that you've kind of now launched yourself into bringing all of these things into the classroom without having end results. And now I'm kind of interested in what will be the end results, sort of putting the stress back into it. Is it going to be to make the kids enjoy coming to the art room more? Will it inform their art practice so that they actually become better artists because they've done these things? They're now freer to create. No, these are kind of open questions. I don't know that it's not something you may not find out for a whole bunch of years.
Yeah.
When students start coming back. Is it to give them tools to go into corporate retreats and do the kinds of ice-breaking sorts of things that those happen? I think it's really going to be an interesting trajectory.
Yeah, I'm excited to see kind of how all of this translates into my own teaching, and I'm already kind of thinking about that for my next year, cause, going into a new school district, having a blank canvas and going in with really like a plan and a concept to kind of go from, so it's exciting.
Amanda, it'd be interesting to maybe forge some relationships outside the art and design department at your new high school, and say the history department or the English department or the science department, to see if some of the skill sets that students are learning through these are translating there. And I think like you've done some really nice work here. That idea of creative confidence is a much longer process that you just don't have the time while you're here to chart how that's working. And I mean, I worry about it with our undergraduates, have we really prepared them to go out and do that? Because it's so often confused as an artistic endeavor. Creativity is an artistic endeavor. And we know that it's not. Creativity exists in all disciplines, right? So be curious to, reach across the departments at your school and see what's happening there. And maybe share some of these ideas and how they can be incorporated into a history class. Right?
There's definitely like something that I want to do in this new school. It's a little smaller as well, and they're already asking me to do these things, which is really encouraging for me because it's, we're not just confined to the art room. We're expanding out into like the sciences and the math and all of that, which is exciting. All the STEAM type stuff is really exciting to me too. So
you may want to look into visual literacy and learning outcomes based around visual literacy because I see a lot of connections here to that. There is actually a huge conference happening here in Cambridge in the fall around visual literacy, and I've been part of an institute at my institution, and I was actually paired up with a math faculty member. And we were trying to think about how we could get students to understand, like abstract concepts in math through drawing. And so how do you get a bunch of math students to typically think, well, I'm a math major because I'm not a creative, or even working with a faculty member who says, I can't even draw a stick figure, right? How do you free them up to do more learning through a sketching process or through free making or through free drawing?
Yeah. And
he found that he started to incorporate students mapping their process when going through the problem, trying to solve a problem. And in more cases, he was able to identify the source of confusion with a problem by seeing a student draw out the math. And this came from us collaborating together. And oftentimes he would see a student who got the answer right, but the drawing would be incorrect. And then he realized, well, the answer is still technically wrong if they don't understand how they got there. Whereas in math, we typically think, oh, if they get the right number, they've got the right answer. You know, so I feel like this is where some of the work that you're doing, if you can think about how this relates to visual literacy and how it relates to your colleagues at the school, how these tools can be implemented into some of the other classrooms.
Right? Definitely. I like to go to that conference.
Well, Amanda, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Could distribute this. Show people my story.
You're good to go.
I think so. I mean, I haven't tried the sound, but
What?
I haven't tried the sound.
Cute.
I'm gonna put so many like eggs, Easter eggs I have left.
Oh.
Yeah, the sound, I don't know. How can we test the sound?
Do you want the microphone?
This?
This is for the stream.
Okay, but how about the
turned,
video?
I turned the mic. This is the mic volume. I turned it down.
Oh, okay.
Because I wasn't speaking into it, but if you want it,
That's fine.
This is, do you want to put a video on quick just to see if it...
Do you?
Good?
Sorry.
So just use the arrows when you adjust it.
On this one?
Yeah.
And this one is what the microphone.
That's this.
Here. We don't need it?
I didn't use it.
Huh?
I didn't use it. I turned it down. Because this is
enough.
It might interfere with that
Oh,
too. I
okay.
don't know. What are these?
They're financier, so there's egg, almond flour,
Are there like little
like little sponge cake.
Is it like a cupcake tin that you?
Just like the financier, the French one.
Alright, let me know if you want me to.
That'll be enough for now.
But yeah, I like
It is.
Can I have your attention, please? Amanda, congratulations. You successfully completed all the requirements for the MFA in Design at Dynamic Media Institute. Congratulations. Hey, Tuyen, can you give us 3 minutes?
Of course. Having those chocolates in our house.
Not the back.
Just drop it back. Just drop it back.
They're heavy too. Thought it was recyclable.
Are they watching right now?
Yeah.
Can you check how many?
7.
Oh, okay.
I had a student come in and build something very similar to ball pit, like something moving in space or video. I didn't find he's struggling with trying to make it work. And eventually I told him to just simulate it in After Effects. He's been having industrial designer things right now. But then I'm watching you got to know my
Tuyen, thank you for your patience.
No worries. We've been eating without you guys. I made some little like financier.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, here we go. What order for lunch?
You knew we all needed things.
Yes. They usually go before lunch and people are starving, myself included.
Okay, let's go. You ready?
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Tuyen, and this is my thesis defense. 3 years ago, I came to Boston with the desire to change my life. I wanted a new beginning.
I was working and traveling a lot, and my Parisian life was a routine. Moving to Boston wasn't an easy decision. After more than 10 years of working experience, I wanted to return to school to study business. Not only was I coming for education, but also for love. Living outside my home country meant that I would have to adapt to new custom, new culture, new food in a new place. My interest in food didn't begin recently. Growing up in France and being raised by Vietnamese parents have played an important role in my appreciation of food. Both France and Vietnam have wonderful food cultures, so I carry a dual background that has shaped my sensitivity to taste and good food. My early memories about food have always included sharing food with people. There's some kind of courtesy and respect in the act of eating in Vietnamese culture, where food is placed in the center of the table. When people gather around to eat, the elders must first give permission before the meal begins. I discovered this ritual when spending my summers at my grandmother's home in California. I don't remember asking permission from my parents when we ate at home in France. My appreciation of food came a bit later, French food, I mean. Since kindergarten, I could either eat at home or stay at school for lunch. So during my childhood, I discovered French food at school. It was not the best food ever, but I remember there was some kind of diversity, and it was, I think, healthy. I remember my first experiment with food after grabbing a kid's cookbook at the science library. I was about 10 years old, and I thought it would be smart to assemble a hard-boiled egg, half of a tomato, and some corn into a mushroom shape, making it more fun to eat. Cookbooks has always a special meaning for my family. Along with other immigrants' families, were the subject of a published cookbook called La Cuisine des Tribus, the tribe's cuisine. This cookbook portrays different families in France who have exotic origins and who specifically try to recreate the cooking of their home country. In the cookbook, the journey of one meal is documented from its preparation to its consumption. My mother's family stories and recipe unroll over about 20 pages. It wasn't a traditional cookbook, but rather a book where food is the linking thread, a reason to write stories about our multicultural identities. Later on, I pursued a career in communications and event planning, where food was central. One of the most memorable projects I planned was called a 100-course meal. This extraordinary feast was held in a secret location in New York, a location revealed at the last minute with a password. About 40 C-level customers gathered for 3 hours to eat a gigantic meal. All the courses were displayed in visible, and so small groups of 10 people could see what they were going to eat. This created anticipation and an expectation of the experience to come. Food at this event was an excuse for networking, sharing conversation, and building memories. Because my mother was a radio producer, I grew up with a strong interest in media, television, and radio, and even wrote my communication master thesis about cooking shows on French television. I analyzed 3 different styles of cooking shows, frame by frame, language, colors they used. I also conducted some interviews with producers, chefs, and journalists. My initial observation was that food can't be shown properly and is not well presented on TV. Hence my question at that time, how can we translate the not translatable? I was reluctant to learn how to cook for my own mother. I wanted to understand why I was so into cooking show. During my research, I was fascinated by the food I was using, both to entertain and to educate. My first interaction with dynamic media and the DMI was through its website. I found the program really intriguing, and it looked fun and visionary. And I was fascinated because I couldn't understand everything. When I reread my statement of purpose for the MassArt DMI application, the goal I listed was to become a futurologist, someone who is willing to change her life and to try new things. Today, I'm still curious. I love to influence people in order to create an impact, to give them solid direction and good advice. Probably my communication background plays a role there. With the help of dynamic media, I'd like to make a creative impact on people. At the same time, I really enjoy experimenting with food as a sort of social scientist or anthropologist. It all began in the design as experience class. During my first semester at DMI, I created multi-sensory muffin with the mysterious ingredients which has been provided by Gunta Kaza, who invited us to respond visually to the identified plants she had provided. I documented the muffin's preparation with an edited slideshow with an upbeat music and surprised my classmate with the final product for tasting.
Even though I was fairly transparent about the process, it was interesting to me to see some classmates refusing to taste the muffins, as they couldn't identify the plant. Those reactions surprised me, and I made the analogy with eating industrial food. We don't know how it's made, but we still buy it and eat it. This thesis is a journey of researching, making, and remaking myself. It reflects on a set of experiments around food, both eating and preparing, which I created over the course of study at the Dynamic Media Institute. So this was the my food mind map. Here's my thesis abstract. Food is a complex topic that touches on society, behavior, geopolitics, culture, beliefs, history, trends, fads, art, marketing, sensory perception, biology, and more. As someone born in France of Vietnamese immigrants and now living in the US, food is a large part of my intercultural identity. In many cultures, the preparation and sharing of food is strongly associated with conviviality, togetherness, familiarity, and community. In my thesis work, I'm exploring how dynamic media can influence the experience of eating, preparing, and sharing food. Sometimes technology enhances this experience, and sometimes it disrupts it. My intent is to use existing technologies such as Facebook or Skype to connect people around food, as well as to design immersive eating experience that enhance people's self-awareness and empathy and encourage the sharing of meaningful stories and conversation. The contextual research chapter touches on the way I see food. Food as a part of our identity, food as a social experience, and the way food has evolved with media. This chapter will lead to a discussion on my case studies, and all of my case studies fall into some kind of spectrum of eating experience that range from eating alone to eating with others. And I map the feelings of isolation and togetherness that accompany these experiences. As Brillat-Savarin suggested in his famous book, La physiologie du goût, I think it's Physiology of Taste, tell me what kind of food you eat, and I will tell you what kind of man you are. This highlights that the consumption of food is often at the center of what observers think of others, as well as what people think of themselves as they make individual food choices. Claude Flischler, the renowned French social scientist who writes about food and nutrition, elaborates on Brillat-Savarin's idea, declaring, food is essential to an individual identity, and in that any individual is constructed biologically, psychologically, and socially by the food he chooses to incorporate. Food as a cultural identity. Food is an essential component of the sense of collective belonging and part of our intercultural identity. Human beings mark their membership within a culture or in a group by asserting the specificity of what they eat, as well as stretching out our separateness from others through what we choose not to eat. In this blog-turned-book project called Paris versus New York, A Tale of Two Cities, the French graphic designer Muratian offers an interpretation of the cultural cliches that distinguish the two cities and offers a view of the differences between the two cultures. Some of his humorous visual responses pay tribute to their national food differences, like baguette versus bagel, pâtisserie versus pastrami, croque-monsieur versus hot dog. If food is part of our identity, who we are is also a reflection of our past. I come from French and Vietnamese cultures where food serves an important function to the immigrants community. A nostalgia for home-cooked broth, the connection between mother and daughter are forged through food. Food is seen as a vehicle for recollection of childhood and family. La Madeleine de Proust has become fairly a common French expression, referring to any phenomenon that triggers a sensory reminiscence. Marcel Proust wrote a scene about a Madeleine in a cup of tea that triggered a memory of his childhood. In his book Du côté de chez Swann, he describes this as one of the best moments of his life. Most of us have memories of food that can bring back memory from childhood. From French and Vietnamese, both French and Vietnamese food play a large part in my own memories and the way I look at myself in both cultures. We should note that breaking bread and sharing it with friends means friendship itself, symbolizing trust, pleasure, and gratitude in the sharing. As a food, but also as a symbol, bread is the sharing bond which unites us. The Latin word companions means literally a person with whom we share bread, so that every member of our company shares the significance evoked in breaking bread. My own Vietnamese Madeleine de Proust is not only the pho that you see here on the picture on the right, this delicious soup that can be eaten for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, but also the banh mi, which is a product of French and Vietnamese food heritage that some of you have tried last year. After showing you some of the food pictures, I'm sure this has triggered some of your senses, and it's right before lunch. As a matter of fact, food is a multisensory experience, including taste, smell, touch, sound, and sight. Although we rely greatly on taste and smell when we're eating, all of our senses contribute to the experience. The food we consume is a large part of our identity, including our memory of the past and our sense of the present. While eating food relates to our human identity, food, by being repeatedly eaten, also becomes the center of our rituals. What are the rituals? Rituals have the ability to create a space within an everyday space that is sacred or meaningful. When food are incorporated into a ritual, they have the potential to change the air of a space from ordinary to extraordinary. Ritual can range from a cozy ritual of making a Christmas cookie with your family to the precise practice of a Japanese tea ceremony. In both cases, food is the central focus and the main reason for the ritual to take place. Rituals have involved food as often interactive. They often require a minimum for multiple individuals in order to perform the rituality properly. Because of this, each individual's evolve plays a particular role. Margaret Visser in Ritual for Dinner set the tone in her introduction. We use eating as a medium for social relationships. Satisfaction of the most individual of needs becomes a means of creating community. The word that defines the act of eating in the company of other came to me very late in this research: commensality. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, commensality means the habit of eating at the same table. The word derives from the Latin com, together with, and mensa, table. On the most basic level, commensality is about eating and drinking together, but it is far more than just a physical act. It includes the myriad of social and political elements entailed by those occasions. By being together in the same space, we are nourished both physically and socially. However, eating together can be done either in the private or public sphere. Eating is an individual experience. It is something we've created as a social experience, but the act itself of it is very much individual. It is something we do alone, even if it's in front of others. Although the act of eating always has a deeply private component, unlike our other most private activities, food is integrally connected to open sharing, whether in ritual, feast, reciprocal exchange, or context in which it is bought and sold. If we think of the opposite of commensality, we think of eating alone. Eating alone has become less an occasion exercise than a fact of life. I mean, we've been raised with the notion that dining is a social experience, only complete when sitting across from one another. However, nearly half of all meals and snacks in the US are now eaten in solitude. And this is not only in the private sphere. Dining alone is pretty much now some kind of meditative or pushed to be a solitude aspect. In many cultures, food table manners don't require forks and knives. And food is still a social practice. There are some quirky manners that might look foreign to the eye of an American. To give an example, in Japan and in China, slurping your noodles shows appreciation of the meal. The host takes all the nose as a compliment. At the end of the meal, it is custom to place the chopsticks on the plate or use the chopstick rest. Placing them upright in the bowl of rice is considered as a faux pas. And this is how food is offered to the spirit of a dead person. For anyone who likes to cook or go to the restaurant as I do, it's hard not to check the internet for recipes, recommendation, hot new restaurants, and to browse cookbooks, magazines, and blogs. Our perception of food has evolved with the media. But for the purpose of this thesis, I will focus on the evolution of how food interacts with the media, from printed cookbooks to the mediatization of food on television, and more recently with forums, blogs, online platforms. Social media has drastically changed the way we eat and prepare food. The earliest cookbook discovered appeared to be made from clay tablets From Babylon, dated 1750 BC, it is considered one of the first cookbooks. Among the dishes sketchily described, it includes quail on barley, a bread, and turnips stewed in blood. Let's jump in time and note that one of the most popular best-selling books remains Irma Rombauer, The Joy of Cooking. And I remember seeing it at a lot of places at your house, for those who have visited. First published in 1931, The Joy of Cooking was originally self-published by Rombauer as an attempt to keep busy after her husband died. The layout of the recipe was narrative, offering ingredients and measurement as they appeared in the instructions instead of as a list that would be more easily understood. In my cookbook research, I encountered an unusual cookbook by Salvatore Dali. Only 400 copies of the book were printed. I was lucky enough to be allowed to carefully view it at the MassArt library with gloves. The surrealist Dali always wanted to be a chef. And in 1973, he published this strikingly bizarre cookbook of 136 recipes in 12 chapters called Les Dîners de Gala. It includes quirky dishes such as bush of crayfish and Viking herbs, with no real list of ingredients, a tree of cooked crawfish, an oasis leek pie, made to look like a palm tree beckoning from the desert, a bacon-wrapped eel stuffed inside of a fish. These recipes were accompanied with unusual illustration, collage, and photographs. Dali and his wife Gala were known for their opulent dinner parties, which were considered more theatrical than gustatory. During the advent of television in the 50s, fundamental changes occurred the way Americans ate and the way they saw food. Through the medium of television, viewers watched others prepare and eat food that had evolved from a form of nourishment to a form of entertainment. Television changed the way we eat, particularly in the United States. While television may have entrenched of passivity while making food preparation easier and faster, it's also spawned the new dining trend called TV dinners. It was made by those guys called Swanson and Son, and they had a surplus of turkey after Thanksgiving. They packaged it into compartmentalized trays that look like a TV set, and that's it. Cooking programs which began on the radio and transitioned to television in the 40s have stood the test of time. As author Kathleen Collins explained, the genre managed to stay current and appeal to audience from generation to generation by holding up a mirror in our own domesticated lives. TV cooking shows were a way to promote food rationing recipes during World War II. Since the premiere of Julia Child's The French Chef in 1963, cooking shows have moved from educational programming into mainstream entertainment. By the early 90s, the Food Network emerged as a reflection of America's foodie scene, which can be seen in reality shows, hybrid like Top Chef, Hell's Kitchen, etc., etc. Remember, Anthony Bourdain said, he's a famous celebrity foodie, said about this phenomenon as the new pornography. We talk about it, but we don't eat it. I can't remember the note, it's hidden under here. Today, foodies are able to go public and mainstream thanks to the explosion of food forum, blogs, and online food and cooking platforms. We experience dozens of website collectives and mobile applications such as Epicurious, All Recipes, the New York Times Cooking, but nowhere is a sense of social networking more apparent than the explosive area of personal food blogs. Blogs are used in tandem with companion social platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, with each application helping generate a sense of proximity and immediacy to the online food community. For the last couple of years, I've seen food startups popping up trying to bridge the gap between takeout and from-scratch home cooking. These meal services, kit services, like Brew Plum Plated, it just at cooking, the Boston version, try to reinvent the dinner ritual. The eating and preparing of food has evolved and adapted over the years through its evolution from printed cookbooks to online community forum and social network. Even as technology has changed the way we eat and the way we prepare food, it has never stopped reinforcing the idea of food as an essential part of community and sharing. We've seen that food, with its different facets, is a complex topic. It fuels our body and becomes part of us. It shapes both our body and our identity. Food is a shared testimonial of our social values. With the evolution of media, food can be shared remotely as a digital experience. And this is an example of a restaurant in Israel that put together technology and tableware. After 2 semesters working on my thesis project, it was time to reflect on them. My first experiments were about senses, and later I used existing technology or tools when available to track and enhance the experience I was looking at. Dynamic media is not restricted to the use of technological devices. My approach to experiment involving food was low-tech and analog. I used existing tools if possible, and if not, I built appropriate tools and props. I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. I was more interested in deep listening and observing behaviors by analyzing the small details that we don't usually see. Attending shared circle class at MIT called Technology and Self, Technology and Conversation was a turning point in the direction of my thesis. Her latest book, Reclaiming Conversation, Turkle explains her dissatisfaction with technology. She's not really against technology, but more pro-conversation, an approach that is rather hopeful for humanity. After examining all aspects of conversation as well as solitude, family, friends, education, and romance, Turkle calls for collective action. She also dedicated the past 15 years to the idea of being alone together and the notion that our human relationships are suffering in the digital age. I believe my food-centric work offers an overview of the digital era in exploring different aspects and conducted different experiments around food. The topic of food is limitless, but one thing is for sure, is that food always involves an eater. I see 2 characteristics in our eating pattern, and psychological state, horizontal, and a geographical state. We eat alone, excluded or separated, or together, or we can feel alone as well. Who really enjoy eating alone? Raise your hand. See? Even though eating is one of the most intimate acts, it is almost impossible to eat alone happily without distracting ourselves. What really happens when you eat alone? My first observation is that we focus more on our food and how we're eating, especially through senses. This series of experiments that I called In the Dark and Eat Big are playful experiments that focus on our senses. What if our forks were telescopic and a chopstick were quadruple the size of regular ones? Using this extraordinary cutlery engaged our sense of touch and to a certain extent our body awareness. For In the Dark, I was inspired by the commercial dining experience founded in Paris by the restaurant chain called Dans le Noir, which literally means in the dark. The restaurant offers a unique human sensory experience and a great place to socialize. Diners there eat in absolute darkness, guided mostly by a visual impaired staff, thereby experiencing food with all of our non-visual senses. In my experiments, I wanted to play with how the omission of certain senses changed the experience. I conducted most of my experiments in the kitchen and dining room of my own home. I like the idea that the audience is in a welcoming, unknown environment, including being in an affordable setting. To obstruct participants' sight, I covered their eye with a scarf. Each participant was asked to sit at the table, blindfolded, and then was invited to taste the food that was offered in a bowl or a plate. Oops. Even though participants knew there was a plate and fork on the table, some of them used their hands instead of the fork to grab the food in the bowl. Oops. That's okay. I'm trying to find where the thing is. Even though participants knew where there was a plate, this led to the concept of proprioception. Proprioception is a sense that allows us to know where our body are in space. Body awareness. Just having trouble finding my... Oops. Just trying to find my mouse.
It's there.
It's there? Yeah, and then...
Bring it to the left.
Sorry, guys.
See it?
Yes, perfect. Oh. Where was I? Even if a person is blindfolded, he or she knows through proprioception if an arm is above our head or hanging by the side of the body. It involves position, motion, and equilibrium. For my second experiment, Eat Big, I wanted to push the idea of body awareness and see how participants would handle cutlery on an unusual side. I first prepared and plated a meal and gave each person a telescopic fork that, when extended, has a length of 25 inches. Participants face each other, each with a plate in front of them. Because the fork was thinner than the one they were familiar with, they at first used it as a toy, expanding, collapsing it, until they had to prompt them to start eating. They had trouble grabbing the food and had to experiment. Again, having young participants introduce some spontaneous behaviors. They were quick to adapt using telescopic fork and realized they couldn't use the fork to pick up the food to put in their mouth. Instead of giving up, they leaned down and used the fork to shovel the food into their mouths. Introducing something as silly as telescoping fork make us focus on eating behaviors that we take for granted. Eating with giant cutlery, and I have some of them, brought the question of an eating signature. I noticed in both experiments that people putting food in their mouth with more or less difficulty was very much a mechanical process. However, I noted that there was some kind of individuality about the motion. Our personalities play a part, even in the way we eat. So my next experiment was about tracking the repetition of eating motions to see if I could detect unique patterns in my initial attempts. My initial attempt, was involved observing those eating in solitude. I came to the conclusion that when we eat alone, we're more conscious of our five senses along with our proprioception. I was inspired by the experiment conducted by Taylor, who studied and photographed workers on an assembly line. They came up with a method of photographing with an open shutter still camera. In the early 20th century, factory managers used these cyclograms of the workers to identify useless motion and standardize the process of more efficient motion. With cyclogram in mind, I tracked my participant eating patterns with gloves and colored tape on their hand using Mac software. The tracking yielded colored dots overlapped with each other and didn't allow a readable rendering. You can see here with the dots. Either the food color was blending with the background, or the act of wearing the gloves biased participants and encouraged them to make more exaggerated movement. It was hard to have people eat naturally without forgetting that they were being observed. Based on this result, I changed the max patch and tweaked an existing code used by Phil right here and his project Try Me. One of the limitations of using the Kinect was tracking the whole body standing, arms and legs spread out like a star shape before participants were able to sit down and eat. I used the setup to create dynamic eating portrait, a range of eating experience from complicated lunches to simple peeling and tasting an orange. Our tracing were able to record and translate participant eating movement from tracked key points, wrist, elbow, and shoulder, linked to a triangle formation, subtly moving, expressing one bite after another, never in the same position. I compared 3 participants eating an orange. The portrait looked the same but different. There were some subtle differences. It was revealing actually to match the visual outcome with the background story of each participant. For instance, one of the participants, who is actually left-handed, ate the orange with her right hand, which eventually created more intense and amplified drawings. The most interesting aspect of this experience was not really the outcome, but the process. First, it helped me as a designer to better understand that participants need to be guided through an experience. They don't know what you know. Having children as participants brought about some enjoyable and playful moments, I have to say. They are less restricted to social norms, and they were inclined to break unsaid rules. Even if they knew the rules, they were pressured to follow them. Basically, don't preview the food with kids, let them experience. This has challenged me to review my educational approach in raising kids. After the playful sensory experience with these experiments, it was hard to see eating as just a banal behavior. It has become a systematic act full of meaning. This project has helped me realize that sharing a meal is a mediated experience. After highlighting the essential experience of eating, I began to pay attention to eating as a social experience. I've discovered that it's impossible to focus to discuss food without the confounding symbolic and actual social overlay of the meal. I invited my in-law family to participate in the tracking meal experience. Oops. This time, the tracking worked continuously, even when the participants were seated. As a result, we almost forgot that the participants were being tracked. So indeed, I did not only track eating homemade pizza, but I tracked the whole conversation and the storytelling that was part of the experience. I was inclined to get to know more about my in-laws and some kind of excuse of having conversation over a tracked meal. For this experiment, the idea started with my personal story. Living in a foreign country, I felt very lonely during lunches. I wanted to be together through food with my family and friends abroad. In spring 2015, I submitted a tentative project inspired by the sharing breakfast by Yael Al-Khalei, and the idea of Connected was to eat together virtually using a software application such as Skype or FaceTime, and recording the video and the conversation through the computer. The goal was to identify some similarities, differences between eating styles and habits, while participating in a shared immersive eating experience. I understood that Connected was a mediated experience because of the computer and the software, and as such, it could change participants' behavior. There are a few possible services that would allow hosts and dinners to connect. Online services like Visit or Eat With follow the Airbnb concept of
whether you're traveling, looking to meet new people,
of focusing
or planning a
on
get
eating at a
with
stranger's
friends.
place.
No matter where you come from, there's something special about a table. The best meals are about more than just the food. They're about the ambiance, the conversations, the people you eat with.
There's an advertising agency in Amsterdam that conceived a virtual holiday dinner. With the help of Skype and a table full of screen-headed doll, participants could literally chat and hang out at the same time with their loved one. The agency managed to create a facial recognition app that would allow Skype callers to control the mechanical doll by just turning the head. Okay, enough. Because I didn't have the resources to equip my participant with high technology for Connected, I was inclined to use the existing video chat system, Skype and FaceTime. The design process I followed was simple. 1, identify potential candidates. 2, schedule a meeting time which was challenging because the time difference between Europe and the US. So in this first series, I documented 4 one-on-one meals. I like to mention the Connected with my mom. She lives in the suburb of Versailles, near Paris. And that day, she called me twice before the actual virtual meeting to check in with me. As if she was preparing her food, it was a steak with French fries and a salad. She wanted to make sure the food was ready when I called. As I wasn't really hungry at that time, I made myself a green tea so she wouldn't have to eat by herself. There's a sense of being unconsciously rude when watching someone eat when you're not. Perhaps it is related to culture, education, evolution, or it might just be a generational thing. For this occasion, I noted that she set her dinner on the dining room table and positioned her iPad in front of her, as if I was facing her in real life. She saw this project as some kind of special event. She was dressed as she was going out for dinner. It was interesting to note that she took the experience more seriously than my American husband here, who I see physically every day, maybe because I don't see my mother very often. Every occasion to see one another becomes very special. In this other connected, my friend Marie-Edith used her iPad and displayed in the center of the table. But this was not the only device at the table. Her iPhone was also on the table, along with the TV remote. Having a screen between us broke down some barriers about table manners and what is acceptable to talk while we're eating. Her dinner manners didn't seem to be very conservative, as she allows technology and media to interfere. The common thread of the 4 meals was that the act of eating, even on the screen, brings out conversation about food. All of our conversations started with the food people were eating and move on eventually and circle back to food. One last observation on these one-to-one connected meals, participants, except for my dedicated mother, were constantly distracted and surrounded by other devices. My husband was surfing on the web during his lunch, a friend was watching TV, one other was doing her beauty routine, and my last friend had her TV on with her phone on the table. This shows how ubiquitous multitasking is today, especially with technological devices. Our attention can barely focus on one activity when we're virtually sharing a meal and being together. For the second part of Connected, I arranged a DMI breakfast. 6 participants were there, 2 having breakfast in the kitchen, 2 in the living room, dining room, 1 in a workspace, and 1 in a public space, a coffee shop. Since Andrew was the first one to join the conversation, I asked him to describe his breakfast. Pat joined us 20 minutes later, and she was dialing in from a coffee shop. We couldn't hear her, but she was able to hear the discussion and type her response in the chat box. At the end of the breakfast, I decided to text her and ask her why she wasn't able to talk. She was actually afraid of disturbing people in the public space. It brought to light all the social norms we observe with technology and why sometimes we forbid ourselves to talk on the phones, even in a public space. Even though we're surrounded by technology, somewhat concerned that it's rude to pick up a call in public. The most interesting feedback came from Joey. She said she was really thankful for this experience. She enjoyed being able to see our personal environment, noticing that both Andrew and I had windows behind us that made her travel mentally. The sound environment, for instance, the clicking cups and an interruption from Andrew's roommate intrigued her. She was able to recreate a mental space from this experience. Experiencing several happy accidents from small technological bugs brought us some spontaneity to the meal. This mediated dining experience managed to connect us, and during the series of meals I was able to feel less alone and more connected. This was an excuse to strengthen bonds with families and friends. Feeling connected isn't limited to being in the same physical space, but can mean sharing a common experience at the same time, connected from any device. Choo Choo is a series of ephemeral happenings that tackle the audience with an enhanced sound of chewing. It all began after the series of analyzing people eating, chewing, slurping. From my initial question, how does it feel to eat while alone? I became obsessed with the sound of eating to the point that I could hear music even in it. I eventually created a short musical piece out of an audio collection of crunching made of people eating potato chips. It's not working. After spending so much time alone myself, I started to wonder what it was like to feel alone when surrounded by people. We all have been in this situation, even this room today, I'm sure. We are in a formal setting, at school, at work. We're trying to eat or snack discreetly in a room full of people. We're trying harder to get noticed by making any noise, but the noise sounds are so loud in our head. In reality, what we hear when we are biting into an apple or any crunchy snack is not what others hear. This is specifically that moment of feeling alone and the awkwardness I wanted Choo Choo to focus on. There's been several relevant inspirations for this project. My fascination for the Korean phenomenon mukbang, literally translated into eating broadcast, in which people simply broadcast themselves as eating a meal, usually gigantic feast. This phenomenon has a tremendous success in Korea. It is more than binge eating. I think it is a way for lonely Korean people to avoid the cultural shame of eating alone. Because for Korean, eating is an extremely social, communal activity which is even why the Korean word family means those who eat together. However, I was also, along with those mukbang video, I was inspired by to learn more about ASMR, which stands for Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response. It can be seen as a perceptual phenomenon characterized by a pleasurable, distinct sensation that relaxes the brain and also other body parts like the head, the scalp, and the back. I'll skip that. As we've seen earlier, in some cultures in Japan, slurping can be seen as a sign of gratitude for the host. For some other, loud eating can be distracting and very annoying. There's even a name for it. It's called misophonia. People with misophonia have specific symptoms and triggers and are sensitive to only certain sounds. They can become really irritated, enraged, and even panicked when they hear them. All those eating sounds, whether we find them relaxing or not, have been put together in an art performance called L'Orchestra by the French-American artist called Émilie Baltz. It's a musical improvisation performance performed by 4 people who licked ice cream cones with embedded sensors, producing a composition of ringing and buzzing sound. Oops. I knew that I wanted to emphasize the sound of eating with chew, but to do that I had to have the right microphone. My objective was to capture the specific sound of chewing. So for this particular project, I needed the sound to capture from a specific location and to be isolated from the background noise. Fred suggested a contact mic that is completely insensitive to air vibration. So the first testing was in the cafeteria in the late afternoon. It was pretty busy and I felt nervous about situating myself in the middle of the tables. The immediate constraint was having the speaker plugged and to be plugged in. Although the contact mic was stuck into the outside of my cheek, the tape wasn't doing a great job, so my hand was holding on to it. I was eating the apple bite after bite and watching people starting to hear distinct sound. But once they found out where the sound came from, they lost interest and returned to what they were doing. So this early prototype was moderately successful. The chewing sound broadcast worked, but the whole setup was limited to my restricted mobility. So for the second iteration, I wanted to make sure people would not immediately match the sound with me. So I like the idea of being mobile and able to walk around without being caught. The second iteration allowed the chewer to be more aware of the surrounding and also to walk around, enhancing the catch me if you can aspect of the performance. The only annoyance was the sound feedback created by being too close to the speakers. But overall, the second attempt was ideal for observing and creating a surprise effect to the captive audience. I noticed about at least 5 confused people trying to figure out what was happening. In Have a Ball, I used a commercial-based bowl-shaped ice cream maker that turned into a playful tool. The ice cream bowl maker was originally marketed by a brand called Lab that was given to me by Fred. It allowed groups to make ice cream at picnics, barbecues, and other social gatherings. The design is pretty simple. It just requires adding ice and rocks on one end and ice cream mix on the other. The ball needs to be in motion about 20 to 30 minutes to allow it to work. It's fairly easy for us to eat together, but I like the challenge of getting people together and make food together. Does making food have the power to connect us, or even for a few moments? Can the act of making food create a community? One example of collaborative project that inspired me is the Johnny Cash project by Aaron Coblin. It's a website that was released in 2010.
There ain't no grave can hold my body down. There ain't no grave can hold my body down.
We created this project to give Johnny Cash fans a chance to collect.
This crowdsourced movie video project was not only a website where anyone can contribute to the video by creating a submitting of their own frame, it was some kind of contribution and to create something together as a whole. It was not only one video, but not one author, but a videographer could claim the credit, but it was a communal project. So in my Have a Ball project, I wanted to bring players together, not to show off their individual skills, but to work together as a team. How would I evaluate this project? Community creation. Again, I reused the codes of the Max patch that previously worked in the Eating Cyclogram project and tweaked the code to tag one specific color with the idea of that tracking the shaking and the interaction between the shaker might create an interesting outcome. Each movement of the ball would be translated into a red dot on the screen. Once the overhead camera was placed on the ceiling, it was recording the movement of the ball, and the input was recognized by the Max software to be able to flag the chosen color. 3 DMI classmates, Bing, Joey, and Yanjun, joined me, along with a random group of students who were passing by. The two groups didn't know each other, but were able to bond over ice cream making and create some sort of temporary connection through this experiment. The prompt was simple. Please put all the ingredients in the bowl and have fun with it. So there was a lot of the group instantly formed a circle and threw the ball at each other. A lot of laughs were exchanged. People were afraid to drop the ball and have it thrown in their faces. Well, it was actually dropped a few times though. So in addition, the group was also shown how the ball was tracked, and they started to play around filling the screen with red dots. I prompted them to stay within the perimeter of the camera. 20 minutes is a long time, and there was a lot of interaction, laughter, and screaming. The recording tool became a drawing tool, and people were playing with it. Someone even brought a guitar and started to play music, while another was drawing it with the ball alone on the screen. It was no longer a circle of people, but an individual task that was passed along to build something together. Suddenly, people who barely knew each other before had something in common. They had a ball and shared a moment together. There was another time where we'd done the experiments at Katie Friendsgiving. There was more participants at that time, also alcohol, people in red shirts, so twisting the ball from left to right, limiting the gesture to a simple twist. But after all, was the tracking that important? The objective of Have a Ball was to create and feel an extended sense of togetherness. I'm not sure if I can define this experience as a community, but it certainly created more interaction among people who were already a group or were artificially grouped together. The creation of food was what the French called having a capitale sympathie, in an icebreaker area, which creates a relaxed atmosphere. I was very optimistic, thinking that I could create a community within a short period of time, but I really enjoyed watching people unwind and create something together. Have a Ball has so much potential as a community builder, and I have only scratched the surface. So this is the summary. I wanted to share the one final project that wraps up my DMI journey here. Chocolate is delicious participative data visualization using food as medium. It surveys lunch habits, whether participants prefer to eat alone, together, or not physically together but connected through media. It's an example of social gathering, collaborative sense-making, playful research, real-time reporting, and experimental inquiry. It all started after the feedback that I received after last DMI review, where guest critic Alison Cotton challenged me to think of my work in a gallery setting. Fresh Media Spring Show and MFA Thesis Show were coming up, so I had the opportunity to experiment with a new project in a gallery. I realized that so much of my work is ephemeral and must be recorded to be archived. I never really imagined showcasing in a gallery setting. I was influenced by my data storytelling studio class at MIT, and I wanted to focus to use the food as a medium to show data in a participative way. I was inspired by artist Lucy Campbell and her physical inverted bar chart called Pindis, made in collaboration with the sociologist Andrew Barry. Pindis invited the audience to choose a pin-up button printed with a response to a question on the wall. How political and citizenship activity represented. The project sought to design a means for pulling individuals as well as to making the response visible. The designer invited participants to make public a reckoning of their everyday political citizenship activity by helping themselves to a button with phrases such as "I recycled" or "I said what I believed." Buttons were displayed in a large plastic tube, which from a distance resembled like physical bar charts. As people took the badges, the level in the tube dropped, representing an aggregated view of political activity. So I wanted to make a similar visualization and finding long tubes that would look like physical bar chart. It was really challenging. As a social scientist, I believe that having an odd number like 5 is better for comparison. I eventually chose milk chocolate Easter egg that you can experience today, again, that came with 3 colors, green, blue, and red, and get about 40 packs, which yield 25 pounds of chocolate. I displayed each color egg in its own tube with a third of the tubes per color. The design would help me visualize the data. The main objective was for me to get interesting data and bring the participants more awareness, opening the conversation about their food habits. Chocolate was featured at Fresh Media at Boston Cyber Arts last March in the Dorland Gallery here at the DMC. I was eager to see how compulsive people can be at the sight of food. I noticed a special relationship to food during one of my midterm presentations when I displayed homemade muffins in front of each attendee and prompt them not to touch or think about it for 15 minutes. And not only was it hard for them not to look at it or to think about it, but some of them, I think it's you, Phil, already had the food in their mouth before I gave it to the prompt. As it was not really a scientific study, I did not bother counting the eggs in each tube. Participants did not always follow the rules. Some were inclined to take more than one, and not only kids. Some would take one and put it back in the other tube. Some took one randomly without reading the pool. However, I knew there were approximately 5 pounds of chocolate per tube, which contained about 300 eggs. I overestimated the compulsive human behavior. People did not throw themselves at the food as I assumed. However, I really enjoyed how the conversation went. It made people aware and share their own lunch habits, such as Bing, who enjoyed eating alone because she has a really practical explanation. She likes to eat alone because she is a slow eater. Or even Martha, hearing your story and why you picked all the chocolate from all the tubes. If I were to rerun the experiments, I would create a beautiful design vinyl decal question like my So Happy show here. What I learned from running experiments in 2 different venues is to stay flexible to allow interaction with food. Results of chocolates have varied from one show to another, from one specific day to another, from one opening to another. As a conclusion, I think Dynamic Media Institute has offered me more than a master's degree. An academic degree doesn't do everything, as my dad would say. DMI is all about the experience, the incredible people I've met, the network I've built, and the inspiration and the skills I have acquired. All the experiments presented in this thesis were mediated. Food was the obvious link and element of mediation. But since the experiments were all recorded and documented, technology played an important role in enhancing or disrupting the experience. In adding dynamic media to all the experience, there's always a layer of gain or loss. There were more projects I could have included in this thesis, and many more I could have done. But having the time to reflect on what has been done was important, or maybe even more important than the execution. I appreciate that the thesis document has forced me to think more deeply about my work. It took me a while before I was able to narrow down my exploration to a presentable and succinct body of work. I was ultimately not interested in designing new ways of eating, but rather designing experience with food as a medium and using technology as a tool to study human behavior in the experience of eating. It is the human part that is the most interesting to me, observing how people interact in my experiments and taking a snapshot of our era and culture. I've learned so much than the new tool sets of skills. I've learned about myself. I was going through a lot of changes in my life when I started the DMI journey. And we all know what significant changes in life tremendously impact the way we see things. Among those changes, such as living abroad with my new American family, food was what I was most often fell back on of comfort. At the beginning of this journey, I was compartmentalizing my school life and my personal life. But I vividly remember Gunta saying one day that she couldn't escape her personal life while working on her PhD. You will feel better and more efficient once you embrace it, she said, and she was right. I now realize that my food-based projects were mostly kid-friendly, unintentionally making sure that those projects were understandable to a younger crowd. I always think if a 5-year-old can understand it, that anybody can. Projects like Have a Ball or Eat Big made me more conscious of the user and the audience. What's in it for them? What do they gain or lose from the experience? I never intended to become a digital technology expert, but surprisingly, without realizing, I have learned enough to get things done. And isn't it the best part of education, looking back at who we are, what we knew, and what we know now? I've never thought of myself as simply an artist or a designer. I always felt more like an observer. I remember that Joe said to me one day, a good designer has to be a good observer. I believe that being an observer means going beyond the horizon of self-reflection. It requires me to broaden my elder vision, to interpret seemingly insignificant gesture, eating or preparing, while trying to decode the structure of such detail and how they relate to each other. I try throughout this journey to make my knowledge and my own life experiences to understand and give meaning to the experience. It was all about sense making. Hearing Sherry Turkle telling me that we should be pro-conversation became very important during my food research. While writing this document, I've heard so many wonderful stories that evolve around food and experiences. Every single person who read this document, including my thesis advisor, Lisa, my writing support, Anne, would share the memories while helping me edit my own words. Whether it was a childhood memory linked to TV dinners or a recent bad restaurant experience, I was a witness to their personal food stories, which I really enjoy hearing about and collecting. Food has a capital sympathie, as the French will say, and it allows all kind of conversation, usually mostly positive. When I started this program, I embraced the idea of working for myself. I wanted to be a futurologist, someone whose job is to foretell the future of human behavior. Once in the program, I opened myself to new horizon and fancied the idea of being a design researcher using a mix of anthropological and social studies. I've never imagined working in the food industry before, but now I have experience working in a French pastry shop and a Japanese and Spanish restaurant, tapas restaurant in here. In the near future, I look forward to keep nurturing the DMI community. I'd love to be involved with education, sharing with others what I've learned, and transmitting this experience. I could definitely see myself some kind of part-time educator. But on the other hand, I have to say, I still have the urge to have my own business, and I would regret it if I don't do it. I think the DMI experience has given me more courage to take risks. The prototyping philosophy is cherished here at DMI. I remember take a Sharpie dude, or prototype. Those are my DMI mantras. This prototyping ethic will help me build a plan for my food-related business. I think I'm ready to try. I imagine a business related to food, focused on some kind of hospitality events in convivial and modular space. And as Winston Churchill once said, success consists of going from failure to failure without lost enthusiasm. I know I'm not scared of success because you get there by not being scared of failure. Thank you very much. I would like to thank Lisa and Fred for their mentorship during this thesis process. Joe, Yan, Guta, the whole DMI family. And Jay.
I could barely see you.
Yeah, sorry.
Big screen in front of you. Thank you very much. There's a lot here to talk about. And so I'm going to do my best to try to make it sound coherent. The first thing that I noticed is you had a nice way of connecting the work you were doing to this X and Y axis, from the alone to together, from isolated to connected, that you sort of framed your projects around this. But I think that there's something even deeper happening than just trying to address these things on these quadrants. I noticed that in your research, you're sort of identifying a lot of social norms surrounding food, and then what you've done through your case studies is challenge these social norms associated around eating. And I saw you doing this in two ways, through guided experimentation and then also through spontaneous setups. So with the guided experimentation, things like the Eat Big project, I'm giving you these large utensils, what will happen? The Connect Eat project, where you set up these specific times to meet people digitally. And then proprioception. Am I saying that right?
Proprioception.
And that to me was also interesting, or the idea of having someone in the dark eating and then feeding them. And then there were the spontaneous projects like Choo Choo and Have a Ball, I thought were really interesting to me, and also the setup with the data visualization with the food. Those were interesting to me because it was allowing people to sort of participate in the process. Even with Choo Choo, if you're just there making noise, it was still, I would have loved to have seen more people's reactions to that. And I was trying to get at sort of what, particularly with Have a Ball, like where that was going, because I could kind of see the connection to Have a Ball to the, let me go back on my notes here, sorry. The piece where you tracked people eating, where you mapped them while they were eating.
Cyclograms?
Yes, the cyclograms, thank you. I could see, and I know aside from using the same technology to do that, the cyclograms were less interesting to me because that could have mapped anything. It could have mapped someone dancing, it could have mapped, but it just happened to be mapping someone eating. So it would have been interesting maybe if that had another aspect to it to kind of frame it. And with Have a Ball, I love the spontaneity of it, but I felt like that needed a little bit more framing, because I'm like, what's inspiring people to do this, to move the ball around? Like, it's fun seeing that it's being tracked, and the end result is we all get ice cream, but what is it?
Yes.
What is it we're going for?
Yes, I agree, and I feel like in doing those experiments, one of the things that I was lacking is making more rules for people to be. This is where it was a bit tricky for me. It's like when you give too much rule, you're expecting and you're assuming the reaction, and you don't give enough, then they started to be a bit messy. So this is where I think the curve where for a designer to what do you want to get out of it seems to it has to drive the rules. Yes.
But I think your participants brought something very interesting to this. You said that while people were playing with the ice cream maker, the ball, that someone brought in a guitar and started playing music. So here's what this tells me. There's some sort of link between the making of food and choreography, and I think that might be something you want to think about. And there's a clear link to it in some of the work you've already done, like the 100-course meal is a very delicate choreography of pulling together, all these meals and getting everybody to participate. A concept of Blue Apron is sort of setting things out for us and telling us how to prepare it, what to do. So I guess, not to throw you a curveball or anything, but I just wrote down this note. What is the relationship of choreography to food preparation?
It's interesting what you said, because there's some work that I haven't mentioned here that followed when I was tracking people eating, I started to track people making food. Fred has experienced that. I was making the meringues, and I asked people to come over and start to have this, as you say, choreography. And it was really interesting to see how the way people do things, and it tells a lot about the education. So a lot of people never whisk eggs or use the electric thing. So I didn't include that because it was way too long, but it was kind of the continuity of tracking and the choreography and having this motion of how to make things.
Yeah, so I would just say moving forward, find that intersection between the broad spontaneous work and the tight sort of guided experiences, and where can you find that place in between. So, great, thank you.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. I don't know why, but there's something here.
You
Did you look at the Futurist cookbook?
Yes,
By
of
Marinette
course,
Elliott?
yeah.
It's interesting because I think he predicted a lot of what we found out through food, like that starchy foods make you lethargic,
Yes.
not good for you. As an Italian guy in 1900
Exactly.
or whatever, it's kind of weird that he figured that out. Yeah, I really loved it. Great presentation. Thanks.
Thank you. There's a mic here. We want to.
Tuyen, it's been lovely to have you here these 3 years. I remember our first conversations like they were yesterday, actually. And I think one thing that you've done for us, aside from the really interesting work in an area that no one had touched before at BMI, was you brought a great sense of hospitality to the program and to our community here, and conviviality as well. Through your interest in this, it's really been a wonderful experience for me to sort of see it through your eyes, and given you're from two of the greatest food cultures, right?
Well, so to like American food now.
Sorry
I can't say like there's not good burgers. Burgers are good here.
We had a lot to learn from you. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you for such a generous spirit you brought to our program and the DMI family.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe, for pushing me, because I remember at the beginning, I was more around like, doing something around the future, but I couldn't put down the thing. And then I think we had this conversation one day when you said, what are you doing right now? Like, I'm cooking, I'm baking. It was around winter, and it was really depressing. I said, you should go for it, you should go for it. And I did. I don't regret it.
Well, I mean, I think what's wonderful is that it's yet another sign that technology finds its way into so many aspects of our lives, and why not? Why not this? You know, it's been a holdout in some respects for a while. Although your previous master's degree proved that it hadn't been. And you know, there's that bizarre paradox that I watch the Food Network way more than I'd like to admit, and I can't smell anything on it, I can't taste anything on it, and I don't particularly like watching people eat, to be honest. So, but why am I doing it? So, I mean, I think you've placed us, and we saw some examples of this yesterday, actually, is that you've placed us in the here and now of what it means to be a human being in many ways. And this is one of the most common things, you know, that we all share. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Invite your advisors outside real quick for a quick conversation. When we come back, we'll be serving lunch. Now, if you don't like germs and blood, I would recommend that you go to the cafe.
I have plenty of chocolate still.
How are you? Nice to see you again.
I have kids, right?
My computer just crashing.
It was like running really slow on the other Yeah, I mean, I think it's just warming up. I didn't have a problem yeah, but then it was okay. Tuyen, it brings me great joy to say that you have more than successfully fulfilled the requirements of my So we're going to serve lunch in just a second. Give me a couple minutes. I'll set it up here. I hope we have enough. I don't know. Maybe not. We'll share. We were scheduled to start in 20 minutes. I don't think that's reasonable. But I am thinking that maybe we start at 2:30. Can we do that, Leo? Sure. Is that all right? Yeah. Dan, is that okay? All right. So just give us 1 second.